Night Watches by W. W. Jacobs. Back to back. Mrs. Scutts, concealed behind the curtain, gazed at the cab in uneasy amazement. The cabman clambered down from the box and, opening the door, stood by with his hands extended ready for any help that might be needed. A stranger was the first to alight, and, with his back towards Mrs. Scutts, seemed to be struggling with something in the cab. He placed a dangling hand about his neck and, staggering under the weight, reeled backward supporting Mr. Scutts, whose other arm was round the neck of a third man. In a flash Mrs. Scutts was at the door. Mr. Scutts raised his head sharply and his lips parted, then his head sank again, and he became a dead weight in the grasp of his assistants. "He's all right," said one of them, turning to Mrs. Scutts. A deep groan from Mr. Scutts confirmed the statement. "What is it?" inquired his wife, anxiously. "Just a little bit of a railway accident," said one of the strangers. "Train ran into some empty trucks. Nobody hurt, seriously," he added, in response to a terrible and annoyed groan from Mr. Scutts. With his feet dragging helplessly, Mr. Scutts was conveyed over his own doorstep and placed on the sofa. "All the others went off home on their own legs," said one of the strangers, reproachfully. "He said he couldn't walk, and he wouldn't go to a hospital. Wanted to die at home," declared the sufferer. "I ain't going to be cut about at no hospitals." The two strangers stood by watching him, then they looked at each other. "I don't want no hospitals," gasped Mr. Scutts. "I'm going to have my own doctor." "Of course the company will pay the doctor's bill," said one of the strangers to Mrs. Scutts, "or they'll send their own doctor. I expect he'll be all right tomorrow." "I hope so," said Mr. Scutts, "but I don't think it. Thank you for bringing of me home." He closed his eyes languidly, and kept them closed until the men had departed. "Can't you walk, Bill?" inquired the tearful Mrs. Scutts. Her husband shook his head. "You go and fetch the doctor," he said, slowly. "That new one round the corner." "He looks such a boy," objected Mrs. Scutts. "You go and fetch him," said Mr. Scutts, raising his voice. "Die here." "But," began his wife. "If I get up to you, my gal," said the forgetful Mr. Scutts, "you'll know it." "Why, I thought," said his wife, in surprise. Mr. Scutts raised himself on the sofa and shook his fist at her. Then, as a tribute to appearances, he sank back and groaned again. Mrs. Scutts, looking somewhat relieved, took her bonnet from a nail and departed. The examination was long and tedious, but Mr. Scutts, beyond remarking that he felt chilly, made no complaint. He endeavored, but in vain, to perform the tests suggested, and even did his best to stand, supported by his medical attendant. Self-preservation is the law of nature, and when Mr. Scutts's legs and back gave way, he saw to it that the doctor was underneath. "We'll have to get you up to bed," said the latter, rising slowly and dusting himself. Mr. Scutts, who was lying full length on the floor, acquiesced, and sent his wife for some neighbors. One of them was a professional furniture remover, and, halfway up the narrow stairs, the unfortunate had to remind him that he was dealing with a British working man, and not a piano. For pairs of hands deposited Mr. Scutts with mathematical precision in the center of the bed and then proceeded to tuck him in, while Mrs. Scutts drew the sheet in a straight line under his chin. "Don't look much the matter with him," said one of the assistants. "You can't tell with a face like that," said the furniture remover. "It's what you might call a happy face. Why, he was half smiling as we carried him up the stairs." "You're a liar," said Mr. Scutts, opening his eyes. "All right, mate," said the furniture remover, "all right. There's no call to get annoyed about it. Good old English pluck, I call it. Where do you feel the pain?" "All over," said Mr. Scutts, briefly. His neighbors regarded him with sympathetic eyes, and then, led by the furniture remover, filed out of the room on tiptoe. The doctor, with a few parting instructions, also took his departure. "If you're not better by the morning," he said, pausing at the door, "you must send for your club doctor." Mr. Scutts, in a feeble voice, thanked him, and lay with a twisted smile on his face listening to his wife's vivid narrative to the little crowd which had collected at the front door. She came back, followed by the next-door neighbor, Mr. James Flynn, whose offers of assistance ranged from carrying Mr. Scutt's out pickaback when he wanted to take the air, to filling his pipe for him and fetching his beer. "But I dare say you'll be up and about in a couple o days," he concluded. "You wouldn't look so well if you'd got anything serious the matter, rosy, fat cheeks and—" "That'll do," said the indignant invalid. "It's my back that's hurt, not my face." "I know," said Mr. Flynn, nodding sagely, "but if it was hurt bad your face would be as white as that sheet, whiter." "The doctor said as he was to be kept quiet," remarked Mrs. Scutts, sharply. "Righto," said Mr. Flynn. "Ta-ta, old pal. Keep your pecker up, and if you want your back rubbed with turps, or anything of that sort, just knock on the wall." He went, before Mr. Scutts could think of a reply suitable for an invalid and, at the same time, bristling with virility. A sinful and foolish desire to leap out of bed and help Mr. Flynn downstairs made him more rubicund than ever. He sent for the club doctor next morning, and, pending his arrival, partook of a basin of arrowroot and drank a little beef tea. A bottle of castor oil and an empty pill-box on the table by the bedside added a little local colour to the scene. "Any pain?" inquired the doctor, after an examination in which bony and very cold fingers had played a prominent part. "Not much pain," said Mr. Scutts. "Don't seem to have no strength in my back." "Ah," said the doctor. "I tried to get up this morning to go to my work," said Mr. Scutts, "but I can't stand. Couldn't get out of bed. Fearfully upset, he was, poor dear," testified Mrs. Scutts. "He can't bear losing a day. I suppose the railway company will arve to do something if it's serious, won't they, sir?" "Nothing to do with me," said the doctor. "I'll put him on the club for a few days. I expect he will be all right soon. He's got a healthy colour, a very healthy colour." Mr. Scutts waited until he had left the house and then made a few remarks on the colour question that for impurity of English and strength of diction have probably never been surpassed. A second visitor that day came after dinner, a tall man in a frock coat, bearing in his hand a silk hat, which, after a careful survey of the room, he hung on a knob of the bedpost. "Mr. Scutts?" he inquired, bowing. "That's me," said Mr. Scutts, in a feeble voice. "I've called from the railway company," said the stranger. "We have seen now all those who left their names and addresses on Monday afternoon, and I am glad to say that nobody was really hurt." "Nobody?" Mr. Scutts, in a faint voice, said he was glad to hear it. "Been a wonder if they had," said the other, cheerfully. "Why, even the paint wasn't knocked off the engine. The most serious damage appears to be 2 top hats crushed and an umbrella broken." He leaned over the bed rail and laughed joyously. Mr. Scutts, through half-closed eyes, gazed at him in silent reproach. "I don't say that 1 or 2 people didn't receive a little bit of a shock to their nerves," said the visitor, thoughtfully. "One lady even stayed in bed next day. However, I made it all right with them. The company is very generous, and although of course there is no legal obligation, they made several of them a present of a few pounds, so that they could go away for a little change, or anything of that sort, to quiet their nerves." Mr. Scutts, who had been listening with closed eyes, opened them languidly and said, "Oh. I gave one gentleman £20, said the visitor, jingling some coins in his trouser pocket. "I never saw a man so pleased and grateful in my life. When he signed the receipt for it, I always get them to sign a receipt, so that the company can see that I haven't kept the money for myself." He nearly wept with joy. "I should think he would," said Mr. Scutts, slowly, "if he wasn't hurt." "You're the last on my list," said the other, hastily. He produced a slip of paper from his pocket-book and placed it on the small table, with a fountain pen. Then, with a smile that was both tender and playful, he plunged his hand in his pocket and poured a stream of gold on the table. "What do you say to £30?" he said, in a hushed voice. 30 golden goblins." "What for?" inquired Mr. Scutts, with a notable lack of interest. Well, to go away for a day or 2, said the visitor. "I find you in bed. It may be a cold or a bilious attack, or perhaps you had a little upset of the nerves when the trains kissed each other." "I'm in bed, because I can't walk, or stand," said Mr. Scutts, speaking very distinctly. "I'm on my club, and if as though I get well in a day or 2, there's no reason why the company should give me any money. I'm poor, but I'm honest. Take my advice as a friend, said the other, take the money while you can get it. He nodded significantly at Mr. Scutts and closed one eye. Mr. Scutts closed both of his. I had my back hurt in the collision, he said, after a long pause. I had to be helped though. So far it seems to get worse, but I'd hope for the best. Dear me, said the visitor, how sad. I suppose it has been coming on for a long time. Most of these back cases do. At least all the doctors say so. It was done in the collision, said Mr. Scutts, mildly but firmly. I was as right as rain before then. The visitor shook his head and smiled. Ah. You would have great difficulty in proving that, he said, softly. In fact, speaking as man to man, I don't mind telling you it would be impossible. I'm afraid I'm exceeding my duty, but as you're the last on my list, suppose we say £40. 40. A small fortune. He added some more gold to the pile on the table, and gently tapped Mr. Scutts's arm with the end of the pen. Good afternoon, said the invalid. The visitor, justly concerned at his lack of intelligence, took a seat on the edge of the bed and spoke to him as a friend and a brother, but in vain. Mr. Scutts reminded him at last that it was medicine time, after which, pain and weakness permitting, he was going to try to get a little sleep. £40, he said to his wife, after the official had departed. Why didn't he offer me a bag o' sweets? It's a lot o' money, said Mrs. Scutts, wistfully. So's 1,000, said her husband. I ain't going to have my back broke for nothing, I can tell you. Now, you keep that mouth o' yours shut, and if I get it, you shall have a new pair o' boots. 1,000, exclaimed the startled Mrs. Scutts. Have you took leave of your senses, or what? I read a case in the paper where a man got it, said Mr. Scutts. He'd had his back hurt too, poor chapter. How would you like to lay on your back all your life for £1,000? Will you have to lay abed all your life? Inquired his wife, staring. Wait till I get the money, said Mr. Scutts, then I might be able to tell you better. He gazed wistfully at the window. It was late October, but the sun shone and the air was clear. The sound of traffic and cheerful voices ascended from the little street. To Mr. Scutts it all seemed to be a part of a distant past. If that chap comes round tomorrow and offers me 500, he said, slowly, I don't know as I won't take it. I'm sick of this mouldy bed. He waited expectantly next day, but nothing happened, and after a week of bed he began to realize that the job might be a long one. The monotony, to a man of his active habits, became almost intolerable, and the narrated adventures of Mr. James Flynn, his only caller, filled him with an uncontrollable longing to be up and doing. The fine weather went, and Mr. Scutts, in his tumbled bed, lay watching the rain beating softly on the window panes. Then one morning he awoke to the darkness of a London fog. It gets worse and worse, said Mrs. Scutts, as she returned home in the afternoon with a relish for his tea. Can't see your and before your face. Mr. Scutts looked thoughtful. He ate his tea in silence, and after he had finished lit his pipe and sat up in bed smoking. Penny for your thoughts, said his wife. I'm going out, said Mr. Scutts, in a voice that defied opposition. I'm going to have a walk, and when I'm far enough away I'm going to have a 1 or 2 drinks. I believe this fog is sent a purpose to save my life. Mrs. Scutts remonstrated, but in vain, and at 6:30 the invalid, with his cap over his eyes and a large scarf tied round the lower part of his face, listened for a moment at his front door and then disappeared in the fog. Left to herself, Mrs. Scutts returned to the bedroom and, poking the tiny fire into a blaze, sat and pondered over the willfulness of men. She was awakened from a doze by a knocking at the street door. It was just 8 o'clock, and, inwardly congratulating her husband on his return to common sense and home, she went down and opened it. 2 tall men in silk hats entered the room. Mrs. Scutts, said one of them. Mrs. Scutts, in a dazed fashion, nodded. We have come to see your husband, said the intruder. I am a doctor. The panic-stricken Mrs. Scutts tried in vain to think. He's asleep, she said, at last. Doesn't matter, said the doctor. Not a bit, said his companion. You can't see him, protested Mrs. Scutts. He ain't to be seen. He'd be sorry to miss me, said the doctor, eyeing her keenly as she stood on guard by the inner door. I suppose he's at home. Of course, said Mrs. Scutts, stammering and flushing. Why, the poor man can't stir from his bed. Well, I'll just peep in at the door, then, said the doctor. I won't wake him. You can't object to that. If you do. Mrs. Scutts's head began to swim. I'll go up and see whether he's awake, she said. She closed the door on them and stood with her hand to her throat, thinking. Then, instead of going upstairs, she passed into the yard and, stepping over the fence, opened Mr. Flynn's back door. Hello, said that gentleman, who was standing in the scullery removing mud from his boots. What's up? In a frenzied gabble Mrs. Scutts told him. You must be of him, she said, clutching him by the coat and dragging him towards the door. They've never seen him, and they won't know the difference. But he exclaimed the astonished James. Quick, she said, sharply. Go into the back room and undress, then nip into his room and get into bed. And mind, be fast asleep all the time. Still holding the bewildered Mr. Flynn by the coat, she led him into the house and waved him upstairs, and stood below listening until a slight creaking of the bed announced that he had obeyed orders. Then she entered the parlor. He's fast asleep, she said, softly, and mind, I won't have him disturbed. It's the first real sleep he's had for nearly a week. If you promise not to wake him, you may just have a peep. We won't disturb him, said the doctor, and, followed by his companion, noiselessly ascended the stairs and peeped into the room. Mr. Flynn was fast asleep, and not a muscle moved as the two men approached the bed on tiptoe and stood looking at him. The doctor turned after a minute and led the way out of the room. We'll call again, he said, softly. Yes, sir, said Mrs. Scutts. When? The doctor and his companion exchanged glances. I'm very busy just at present, he said, slowly. We'll look in some time and take our chance of catching him awake. Mrs. Scutts bowed them out, and in some perplexity returned to Mr. Flynn. I don't like the look of him, she said, shaking her head. You'd better stay in bed till Bill comes home in case they come back. Righto, said the obliging Mr. Flynn. Just step in and tell my landlady I'm having a chat with Bill. He lit his pipe and sat up in bed smoking until a knock at the front door at 11:30 sent him off to sleep again. Mrs. Scutts, who was sitting downstairs, opened it and admitted her husband. All serene, he inquired. What are you looking like that for? What's up? He sat quivering with alarm and rage as she told him, and then, mounting the stairs with a heavy tread, stood gazing in helpless fury at the slumbering form of Mr. James Flynn. Get out o' my bed, he said at last, in a choking voice. What, Bill, said Mr. Flynn, opening his eyes. Get out o' my bed, repeated the other. You've made a nice mess of it between you. It's a fine thing if a man can't go out for half a pint without coming home and finding all the riff-raff of the neighborhood in his bed. Owes the poor back, Bill, inquired Mr. Flynn, with tenderness. Mr. Scutts gurgled at him. Outside, he said as soon as he could get his breath. Bill, said the voice of Mrs. Scutts, outside the door. Hello, growled her husband. He mustn't go, said Mrs. Scutts. Those gentlemen are coming again, and they think he is you. What? Roared the infuriated Mr. Scutts. Don't you see? It's me what's got the poor back now, Bill, said Mr. Flynn. You can't pass yourself off as me, Bill, you ain't good-looking enough. Mr. Scutts, past speech, raised his clenched fists to the ceiling. He'll have to stay in your bed, continued the voice of Mrs. Scutts. He's got a good heart, and I know he'll do it, won't you, Jim? Mr. Flynn pondered. Tell my landlady in the morning that I've took your back room, he said. What a fortunate thing it is I'm out o' all work. What are you walking up and down like that for, Bill? Back coming on again. Then of course, pursued the voice of Mrs. Scutts, in meditative accents, there's the club doctor and the other gentleman that knows Bill. They might come at any moment. There's got to be 2 Bills in bed, so that if one party comes, one Bill can nip into the back room, and if the other comes, the other Bill, you know what I mean. Mr. Scott swore himself faint. That's oh it is, mate, said Mr. Flynn. It's no good standing there saying your little piece of poetry to yourself. Take off your clothes and get to bed like a little man. Now. Now. Naughty. Naughty. Perhaps I oughtn't to have let them up, Bill, said his wife, but I was afraid they'd smell a rat if I didn't. Besides, I was took by surprise. You get off to bed, said Mr. Scutts. Get off to bed while you're safe. And get a good night's rest, added the thoughtful Mr. Flynn. If Bill's back is took bad in the night, I'll look after it. Mr. Scutts turned a threatening face on him. For 2 pins, he began. For 2 pins I'll go back home and stay there, said Mr. Flynn. He put one muscular leg out of bed, and then, at the earnest request of Mr. Scutts, put it back again. In a few simple, manly words the latter apologized, by putting all the blame on Mrs. Scutts, and, removing his clothes, got into bed. Wrapped in bedclothes, they passed the following day listening for knocks at the door and playing cards. By evening both men were weary, and Mr. Scutts made a few pointed remarks concerning dodging doctors and deceitful visitors, to which Mr. Flynn listened in silent approval. They mightn't come for a week, he said, dismally. It's all right for you, but where do I come in? Halves? Mr. Scutts had a rush of blood to the head. You leave it to me, mate, he said, controlling himself by an effort. If I get 10 quid, say, you shall have a laugh. And suppose you get more, demanded the other. We'll see, said Mr. Scutts, vaguely. Mr. Flynn returned to the charge next day, but got no satisfaction. Mr. Scutts preferred to talk instead of the free board and lodging his friend was getting. On the subject of such pay for such work he was almost eloquent. I'll bide my time, said Mr. Flynn, darkly. Treat me fair and I'll treat you fair. His imprisonment came to an end on the 4th day. There was a knock at the door, and the sound of men's voices, followed by the hurried appearance of Mrs. Scutts. It's Jim's lot, she said, in a hurried whisper. I've just come up to get the room ready. Mr. Scutts took his friend by the hand, and after warmly urging him not to forget the expert instructions he had received concerning his back, slipped into the back room, and, a prey to forebodings, awaited the result. Well, he looks better, said the doctor, regarding Mr. Flynn. Much better, said his companion. Mrs. Scutts shook her head. His poor back don't seem no better, sir, she said in a low voice. Can't you do something for it? Let me have a look at it, said the doctor. Undo your shirt. Mr. Flynn, with slow fingers, fumbled with the button at his neck and looked hard at Mrs. Scutts. She can't bear to see me suffer, he said, in a feeble voice, as she left the room. He bore the examination with the fortitude of an early Christian martyr. In response to inquiries he said he felt as though the mainspring of his back had gone. How long since you walked? Inquired the doctor. Not since the accident, said Mr. Flynn, firmly. Try now, said the doctor. Mr. Flynn smiled at him reproachfully. You can't walk because you think you can't, said the doctor, that is all. You'll have to be encouraged the same way that a child is. I should like to cure you, and I think I can. He took a small canvas bag from the other man and opened it. £40, he said. Would you like to count it? Mr. Flynn's eyes shone. It is all yours, said the doctor, if you can walk across the room and take it from that gentleman's hand. Honour bright? Asked Mr. Flynn, in tremulous tones, as the other man held up the bag and gave him an encouraging smile. Honour bright, said the doctor. With a spring that nearly broke the bed, Mr. Flynn quitted it and snatched the bag, and at the same moment Mrs. Scutts, impelled by a maddened arm, burst into the room. You're back, she moaned. It'll kill you. Get back to bed. I'm cured, lovey, said Mr. Flynn, simply. His back is as strong as ever, said the doctor, giving it a thump. Mr. Flynn, who had taken his clothes from a chair and was hastily dressing himself, assented. But if you'll wait half a tick I'll walk as far as the corner with you, he said, quickly. I'd like to make sure it's all right. He paused at the foot of the stairs and, glancing up at the pallid and murderous face of Mr. Scutts, which protruded from the back bedroom, smiled at him rapturously. Then, with a lordly air, he tossed him 5 pieces of gold. Keeping watch. Human nature, said the night watchman, gazing fixedly at a pretty girl in a passing waterman's skiff. Human nature. He sighed, and, striking a match, applied it to his pipe and sat smoking thoughtfully. The young fellow is pretending that his arm is at the back of her by accident, he continued, and she's pretending not to know that it's there. When he's allowed to put it round her waist whenever he wishes, he won't want to do it. She's artful enough to know that, and that's why they are all so standoffish until the thing is settled. She'll move forward half an inch presently, and half a minute afterwards she'll lean back again without thinking. She's a nice-looking gal, and what she can see in a tailor's dummy like that, I can't think. He leaned back on his box and, folding his arms, emitted a cloud of smoke. Human nature's a funny thing. I've seen a lot of it in my time, and if I was to arve my life all over again I expect I should be just as silly as them too in the skiff. I've known the time when I would spend money as free over a gal as I would over myself. I only wish I'd got all the money now that I've spent on peppermint lozenges. That gal in the boat reminds me o' one I used to know a few years ago. Just the same innocent baby look, a look as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, and an artful disposition that made me sorry for her sects. She used to come up to this wharf once a week in a schooner called the Belle. Her father, Cap'n But, was a widow man, and he used to bring her with him, partly for company and partly because he could keep his eye on her. Nasty eye it was, too, when he'd appeared to be out o' temper. I'd often took a bit o' notice o' the gal, just giving the kind smile now and then as she sat on deck, and sometimes, when her father wasn't looking, she'd smile back. Once, when he was down below, she laughed right out. She was afraid of Vim, and by I noticed that she daren't even get off the ship and walk up and down the wharf without asking him. When she went out he was with her, and, from 1 or 2 nasty little snacks I'd appeared to overhear when the skipper thought I was too far away, I began to see that something was up. It all came out one evening, and it only came out because the skipper wanted my help. I was standing leaning on my broom to get my breath back after a bit o' sweeping, when he came up to me, and I knew at once, by the nice way he spoke, that he wanted me to do something for him. "Come and have a pint, Bill," he says. I put my broom agin the wall, and we walked round to the Bull's Head like a couple o' brothers. We had 2 pints apiece, and then he put his hand on my shoulder and talked as man to man. "I'm in a little bit o' difficulty about that gal o' mine," he says, passing me his baccy box. 6 months ago she dropped a letter out of her pocket, and I'm blessed if it wasn't from a young man. A young man? You surprise me, I says, meaning to be sarcastic. I surprised her, he says, looking very fierce. I went to the box and I found a pile of M, tied up with a piece o' pink ribbon. And a photograph of my lord. And of all the narrow-chested, weak-eyed, slack-baked, spindler-legged sons of a gun you ever saw in your life, he is the worst. If I only get my hands on him I'll choke him with his own feet. He washed his mouth out with a drop o' beer and stood scowling at the floor. "Arter I've choked him I'll twist his neck," he says. If he had only put his address on his letters, I'd go round and do it now. And my daughter, my only daughter, won't tell me where he lives. She ought to know better, I says. He took hold of my hand and shook it. "You've got more sense than one you'd think to look at you, Bill," he says, not thinking what he was saying. "You see what a mess I'm in." "Yes," I says. "I'm a nurse, that's what I am," he says, very savage. "Just a nursemaid. I can't move an or foot without that gal. How'd you like it, yourself, Bill?" "It must be very awkward for you," I says. "Very awkward indeed." "Awkward," he says, "it's no name for it, Bill. I might as well be a Sunday school teacher, and hard done with it. I never had such a dull time in all my life. Never. And the worst of it is, it's spiling my temper. And all because over that nar-eyed, red-chested, you know what I mean. He took another mouthful o' the beer, and then he took hold of my arm. Bill, he says, very earnest, I want you to do me a favor. Go ahead, I says. I've got to meet a pal at Charing Cross at 7:30, he says, and we're going to make a night of it. I've left Winnie in charge o' the cook, and I've told him plain that, if she ain't there when I come back, I'll skin him alive. Now, I want you to watch her, too. Keep the gate locked, and don't let anybody in you don't know. Especially that monkey-faced imitation of a man. Here he is. That's his likeness. He pulled a photograph out of his coat pocket and handed it to me. That's of him, he says. Fancy a gal getting love letters from a thing like that. And she was only 20 last birthday. Keep your eye on her, Bill, and don't let her out of your sight. You're worth 2 the cook. He finished his beer and, cuddling my arm, stepped back to the wharf. Miss but was sitting on the cabin skylight reading a book, and old Joe, the cook, was standing near I pretending to swab the decks with a mop. I've got to go out for a little while, on business, says the skipper. I don't suppose I shall be long, and, while I'm away, Bill and the cook will look after you. Miss but wrinkled up her shoulders. The gate'll be locked, and you're not to leave the wharf. Dight we're. The gal wriggled her shoulders again and went on reading, but she gave the cook a look out of her innocent baby eyes that nearly made him drop the mop. Them's my orders, says the skipper, swelling his chest and looking round, to everybody. You know what'll happen to you, Joe, if things ain't right when I come back. Come along, Bill, and lock the gate arter me. And mind, for your own sake, don't let anything happen to that gal while I'm away. What time'll you be back? I says, as he stepped through the wicket. Not afore 12, and perhaps a good bit later, he says, smiling all over with happiness. But young Slabchest don't know I'm out, and Winnie thinks I'm just going out for half an hour, so it'll be all right. So long. I watched him up the road, and I must say I began to wish I'd taken the job on. After all, I had only had 2 pints and a bit o' flattery, and I knew what you'd happen if anything went wrong. Built like a bull he was, and fond o' using his strength. I locked the wicket careful, and, putting the key in my pocket, began to walk up and down the wharf. For about 10 minutes the gal went on reading and didn't look up once. Then, as I passed, she gave me a nice smile and shook the little fist at the cook, what had got his back towards there. I smiled back, of course, and by she put her book down and climbed onto the side o' the ship and held out her and for me to help her ashore. I'm so tired of the ship, she says, in a soft voice, it's like a prison. Don't you get tired of the wharf? Sometimes, I says, but it's my duty. Yes, she says. Yes, of course. But you're a big, strong man, and you can put up with things better. She gave a little sigh, and we walked up and down for a time without saying anything. And it's all father's foolishness, she says, at last, that's what makes it so tiresome. I can't help a pack of silly young men writing to me, can I? No, I suppose not, I says. Thank you, she says, putting a little un on my arm. I knew that you were sensible. I've often watched you when I've been sitting alone on the schooner, longing for somebody to speak to. And I'm a good judge of character. I can read you like a book. She turned and looked up at me. Beautiful blue eyes she'd got, with long, curling lashes, and teeth like pearls. Father is so silly, she says, shaking her head and looking down, and it's so unreasonable, because, as a matter of fact, I don't like young men. Oh, I beg your pardon, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to be rude. Rude? I says, staring at her. Of course it was a rude thing for me to say, she says, smiling, because you are still a young man yourself. I shook my head. Youngish, I says. Young, she says, stamping a little foot. She gave me another look, and this time her blue eyes seemed large and solemn. She walked along like one in a dream, and twice she tripped over the planks and would have fallen if I hadn't caught her round the waist. Thank you, she says. I'm very clumsy. How strong your arm is. We walked up and down again, and every time we went near the edge of the jetty she held onto my arm for fear of stumbling again. And there was that silly cook standing about on the schooner on tiptoe and twisting his silly old neck till I wonder it didn't twist off. "What a beautiful evening it is," she says, at last, in a low voice. "I hope father isn't coming back early. Do you know what time he is coming home?" "About 12, I says, "but don't tell him I told you so." "Oh, of course not," she says, squeezing my arm. "Poor father. I hope he is enjoying himself as much as I am." We walked down to the jetty again after that, and sat side by side looking across the river. And she began to talk about life, and what a strange thing it was, and the river would go on flowing down to the sea thousands and thousands o' years after we was both dead and forgotten. If it hadn't hard been for her little head leaning agin my shoulder I should have had the creeps. "Let's go down into the cabin," she says, at last, with a little shiver. "It makes me melancholy sitting here and thinking of those might-have-beens." I got up first and helped her up, and, after both staring hard at the cook, what didn't seem to know his place, we went down into the cabin. It was a comfortable little place, and after she had poured me out a glass of her father's whiskey, and filled my pipe for me, I wouldn't ha' changed places with a king. Even when the pipe wouldn't draw I didn't mind. "May I write a letter?" she says, at last. "Sartainly," I says. She got out her pen and ink and paper, and wrote. "I shan't be long," she says, looking up and nibbling the pen. "It's a letter to my dressmaker. She promised my dress by 6 o'clock this afternoon, and I am just writing to tell her that if I don't have it by 10 in the morning she can keep it." "Quite right," I says, "it's the only way to get things done." "It's my way," she says, sticking the letter in an envelope and licking it down. "Nice name, isn't it?" She passed it over to me, and I read the name and address, Miss Minnie Miller, 17, John Street, Mile End Road. "That'll wake her up," she says, smiling. "Will you ask Joe to take it for me?" He's on guard," I says, smiling back at her and shaking my head. "I know," she says, in a low voice. "But I don't want any guard, only you. I don't like guards that peep down skylights." I looked up just in time to see Joe's head disappear. Then I nipped up, and after I had told him part of what I thought about him I gave him the letter and told him to sheer off. "The skipper told me to stay here," he says, looking obstinate. "You do as you're told," I says. "I'm in charge, and I take full responsibility. I shall lock the gate after you. What are you worrying about? And here's a shilling, Joe, for a bus fare," says the gal, smiling. "You can keep the change." Joe took off his cap and scratched his silly bald head. "Come on," I says, "it's a letter to a dressmaker. A letter that must go tonight. Else it's no use," says the gal. "You don't know how important it is." "All right," says Joe. "Have it your own way. So long as you don't tell the skipper I don't mind. If anything happens you'll catch it too, Bill." He climbed ashore, and I followed him to the gate and unlocked it. He was screwing up his eye ready for a wink, but I gave him such a look that he thought better of it, and, after rubbing his eye with his finger as though he had got a bit of dust in it, he went off. I locked the gate and went back to the cabin, and for some time we sat talking about fathers and the foolish ideas they got into their heads, and things that sort. So far as I remember, I had 2 more goes whiskey and 1 the skipper's cigars, and I was just thinking what a beautiful thing it was to be alive and healthy and in good spirits, talking to a nice gal that understood what you said a'most afore you said it, when I heard 3 blows on a whistle. "What's that?" I says, starting up. "Police whistle?" "I don't think so," says Miss Butt, putting her hand on my shoulder. "Sit down and stay where you are. I don't want you to get hurt, if it is. Let somebody I don't like go." I sat down again and listened, but there was no more whistling. "Boy in the street, I expect," says the gal, going into the stateroom. "Oh, I've got something to show you. Wait a minute." I heard her moving about, and then she comes back into the cabin. "I can't find the key of my box," she says, "and it's in there. I wonder whether you've got a key that would open it. It's a padlock." I put my hand in my pocket and pulled out my keys. Shall I come and try? I says. No, thank you, she says, taking the keys. This looks about the size. What key is it? It's the key of the gate, I says, but I don't suppose it'll fit. She went back into the stateroom again, and I heard her fumbling at a lock. Then she came back into the cabin, breathing rather hard, and stood thinking. I've just remembered, she says, pinching her chin. Yes. She stepped to the door and went up the companion ladder, and the next moment I heard a sliding noise and a key turn in a lock. I jumped to the foot of the ladder and, horridly able to believe my senses, saw that the hatch was closed. When I found that it was locked too, you might ha' knocked me down with a feather. I went down to the cabin again, and, standing on the locker, pushed the skylight up with my head and tried to look out. I couldn't see the gate, but I heard voices and footsteps, and a little while afterwards I see that gal coming along the wharf arm in arm with the young man she had told me she didn't like, and dancing for joy. They climbed onto the schooner, and then they both stooped down with their hands on their knees and looked at me. What is it? Says the young man, grinning. It's a watchman, says the gal. It's here to take charge of the wharf, you know, and see that nobody comes on. We ought to ha' brought some buns for it, says the young man, look at it opening its mouth. They both laughed fit to kill themselves, but I didn't move a muscle. You open the companion, I says, or it'll be the worse for you. Die hear? Open it. Oh, Alfred, says the gal, he's losing his temper. Whatever shall we do? I don't want no more nonsense, I says, trying to fix her with my eye. If you don't let me out it'll be the worse for you. Don't you talk to my young lady like that, says the young man. Your young lady? I says. You should ha' seen her half an hour ago. The gal looked at me steady for a moment. He put his nasty fat arm round my waist. Alfred, she says. What? Says the young man, squeaking. What? He snatched up the mop what that nasty, untidy cooks had left leaning agin the side, and afore I had any idea of what he was up to he shoved the beastly thing straight in my face. Next time, he says, I'll tear you limb from limb. I couldn't speak for a time, and when I could he stopped me with the mop again. It was like a chained lion being tormented by a monkey. I stepped down onto the cabin floor, and then I told em both what I thought of them. Come along, Alfred, says the gal, else the cook be back before we start. He's all right, says the young man. Minnie's looking arter him. When I left he'd got half a bottle of whiskey in front of them. Still, we may as well go, says Miss Butt. It seems a shame to keep the cab waiting. All right, he says. I just want to give this old chump one more lick with the mop and then we'll go. He peeped down the skylight and waited, but I kept quite quiet, with my back towards him. Come along, says Miss Butt. I'm coming, he says. Hi. You down there. When the cap'n comes back tell him that I'm taking Miss Butt to an aunt o' mine in the country. And tell him that in a week or two he'll have the largest and nicest piece of wedding cake he has ever had in his life. So long. Goodbye, watchman, says the gal. They moved off without another word from them, I mean. I heard the wicket slam and then I heard a cab drive off over the stones. I couldn't believe it at first. I couldn't believe a gal with such beautiful blue eyes could be so hard-hearted, and for a long time I stood listening and hoping to hear the cab come back. Then I stepped up to the companion and tried to shift it with my shoulders. I went back to the cabin at last, and after lighting the lamp I had another sup o' the skipper's whiskey to clear my head, and sat down to try and think what tale I was to tell him. I sat for pretty near 3 hours without thinking of one, and then I heard the crew come onto the wharf. They was a bit startled when they saw my head at the skylight, and then they all started at the same time asking me what I was doing. I told em to let me out fast and then I'd tell em, and one of em had just stepped round to the companion when the skipper come onto the wharf and stepped aboard. He stooped down and peeped at me through the skylight as though he couldn't believe his eyesight, and then, after sending the hands forward and telling em to stay there, whatever appeared, he unlocked the companion and came down. The understudy. Dogs on board ship is a nuisance, said the night watchman, gazing fiercely at the vociferous mongrel that had chased him from the deck of the Henry William. The skipper asks me to keep an eye on the ship, and then leaves a thing like that down in the cabin. He leaned against a pile of empty casks to recover his breath, shook his fist at the dog, and said, slowly, "Some people can't make too much of a lem. They talk about a dog's honest eyes and his faithful art. I had a dog once, and I never saw his eyes look so honest as they did one day when he was sitting on a pound o' beefsteak we was hunting high and low for. I've known dogs to cause a lot of trouble in my time. A man as used to live in my street told me he had been in jail 3 times because dogs followed him home and wouldn't go away when he told them to. He said that some men would hard kicked them out into the street, but he thought their little lives was far too valuable to risk in that way. Some people used to wink when he talked like that, but I didn't. I remembered a dog that took a fancy to old Sam Small and Ginger Dick and Peter Russet once in just the same way. It was one night in a little public house down Commercial Roadway. They had only been ashore a week, and, having been turned out of a musical the night afore because a man Ginger Dick had punched in the jaw wouldn't behave themselves, they said they'd spend the rest of their money on beer instead. There was just the 3 of them sitting by themselves in a cozy little bar, when the door was pushed open and a big black dog came in. He came straight up to Sam and licked his hand. Sam was eating a arrowroot biscuit with a bit o' cheese on it at the time. He wasn't what you'd call a particular sort o' man, but seeing as the dog was so careless that he licked the biscuit almost as much as he did his and he gave it to him. The dog took it in one gulp, and then he jumped up on Sam's lap and wagged his tail in his face for joy and thankfulness. "He's took a fancy to you, Sam," says Ginger. Sam pushed the dog off onto the floor and wiped his face. "He's a good dog, by the look of him," says Peter Russet, who was country bred. He bought a sausage roll, and him and the dog ate it between them. Then Ginger Dick bought one and gave it to him, and by the time it was finished the dog didn't seem to know which one of them he loved the most. "Wonder who he belongs to," says Ginger. "Is there any name on the collar, Peter?" Peter shook his head. "It's a good collar, though," he says. "I wonder whether he's been and lost to himself." Old Sam, what was always on the lookout for money, put his beer down and wiped his mouth. "There might be a reward out for him," he says. "I think I'll take care of him for a day or 2, in case." "We'll all take care of him," says Ginger, "and if there's a reward we'll go shares." "Mind that." "I found him," says Sam, "very disagreeable. He came up to me as if he'd known me all his life." "No," says Ginger. "Don't you flatter yourself. He came up to you because he didn't know you, Sam. If he mad, he'd hard bit you and," says Peter Russet. "Instead o' washing it," says Ginger. "Go on," says Sam, holding his breath with passion. "Go on." Peter opened his mouth, but just then another man came into the bar, and, after ordering his drink, turned round and patted the dog's head. "That's a good dog. How old is he?" he says to Ginger. 2 years last April," says Ginger, without moving an eyelid. 5th of April," says old Sam, very quick and fierce. "At 2 o'clock in the morning," says Peter. The man took up his beer and looked at em, then he took a drink and looked at em again. After which he had another look at the dog. "I could see he was very valuable," he says. "I see that the moment I set eyes on him. Mind you don't get him stole." He finished up his beer and went out, and he had already gone afore Ginger took a piece o' toothpick string out of his pocket and fastened it to the dog's collar. "Make yourself at home, Ginger," says Sam, very nasty. "I'm going to," says Ginger. "That chap knows something about dogs, and, if we can't get a reward for him, perhaps we can sell a limb." They had another half pint each, and then, Ginger taking hold of the string, they went out into the street. 9 o'clock, says Peter. "It's no good going home yet, Ginger." "We can have a glass or 2 on the way," says Ginger, "but I shan't feel comfortable in my mind till we've got the dog safe home. Perhaps the people what have lost it are looking for it now." They had another drink farther on, and a man in the bar took such a fancy to the dog that he offered Ginger 5 shillings for it and drinks round. That shows how valuable it is, says Peter Russet when they got outside. Hold that string tight, Ginger. What's the matter? He won't come, says Ginger, tugging at the string. Come on, old chap. Good dog. Come on. He stood there pulling at the dog, what was sitting down and being dragged along on its stomach. He didn't know its name, but he called it a few things that seemed to ease his mind, and then he handed over the string to Sam, what had been asking for it, and told him to see what he could do. We shall have a crowd round us in a minute, says Peter. Mind you don't bust a blood vessel, Sam. And be locked up for stealing it, perhaps, says Ginger. Better let it go, Sam. What, arter refusing 5 bob for it, says Sam. Talk sense, Ginger, and give it a shove behind. Ginger gave it a shove, but it was no good. There was 3 or 4 people coming along the road, and Sam made up his mind in an instant, and ELD up his hand to a cab that was passing. It took the 3 of them to get the dog into the cab, and as soon as it was in the cabman told them to take it out again. They argufied with him till their tongues ached, and at last, after paying him for shillings and sixpence afore they started, he climbed up on the box and drove off. The door was open when they got to their lodgings, but they had to be careful because of the landlady. It took the 3 of them to pull and push that dog upstairs, and Ginger took a dislike to dogs that he never really got over. They got him in the bedroom at last, and, after they had given him a drink of water out over the wash-hand basin, Ginger and Peter started to find fault with Sam Small. I know what I'm about, says Sam, but, of course, if you don't want your share, say so. What? Talk sense, says Ginger. We paid our share o' the cab, didn't we? And more fools us. There won't be no share, says Peter Russet, but if there is, we're going to have it. They undressed themselves and got into bed, and Ginger hadn't been in his 5 minutes afore the dog started to get in with him. When Ginger pushed him off, he seemed to think he was having a game with him, and, after pretending to bite him in play, he took the end of the counterpane in his mouth and tried to drag it off. Why don't you get to sleep, Ginger, says Sam, who was just dropping off. Have a game with him in the morning. Ginger gave the dog a punch in the chest, and, after saying a few of the things he'd like to do to Sam Small, he cuddled down in his bed and they all went off to sleep. All but the dog, that is. He seemed uneasy in his mind, and if he woke them up once by standing on his hind legs and putting his forepaws on their chest to see if they were still alive, he did 6 times. He dropped off to sleep at last, scratching at himself, but about 3 o'clock in the morning Ginger woke up with a horrible start and sat up in bed shivering. Sam and Peter woke up, too, and, raising themselves in bed, looked at the dog, what was sitting on its tail, with its head back, moaning fit to break its heart. What's the matter, says old Sam, in a shaky voice. Stop it! Stop it, d'ye hear? Perhaps it's dying, says Ginger, as the dog let off a howl like a steamer coming up the river. Stop it, you brute! He'll wake the house up in a minute, says Peter. Take him downstairs and kick him into the street, Sam. Take him yourself, says Sam. HSH. Somebody's coming upstairs. Poor old doggy. Come along, then. Come along. The dog left off his howling, and went over and licked him just as the landlady and 1 or 2 more came to the door and called out to know what they meant by it. It's all right, missus, says Sam. It's only poor Ginger. You keep quiet, he says in a whisper, turning to Ginger. What's he making that row about, says the landlady. He made my blood run cold. He's got a touch o' toothache, says Sam. Never mind, Ginger, he says in a hurry, as the dog let off another howl, try and bear it. He's a coward, that's what he is, says the landlady, very fierce. Why, a child o' 5 wouldn't make such a fuss. Sounds more like a dog than a human being, says another voice. You come outside, Ginger, and I'll give you something to cry for. They waited a minute or 2, and then, everything being quiet, they went back to bed, while old Sam talked to Ginger about what he called his presence o' mind, and Ginger talked to him about what he'd do to him if he wasn't a fat old man with 1 foot in the grave. They was all in a better temper when they woke up in the morning, and while Sam was washing they talked about what they was to do with the dog. "We can't lead him about all day," says Ginger, "and if we let him off the string he'll go off home." "He don't know where his home is," says Sam, very severe, "but he might run away, and then the poor thing might be starved or else ill-treated. I've heard o' our boys tying tin cans to their tails." "I've done it myself," says Ginger, nodding. "Consequently it's our duty to look arter him," says Sam. "I'll go down to the front door," says Peter, "and when I whistle, bring him down." Ginger stuck his head out over the window, and by, when Peter whistled, him and Sam took the dog downstairs and out into the street. "So far so good," says Sam. "Now, what about breakfast?" They are at their breakfast in their usual coffee shop, and the dog took bits from all of them. Unfortunately, he wasn't used to had dick bones, and arter 2 of the customers had gone out and 2 more had complained to the landlord, they had to leave their breakfasts and take him outside for a breath o' fresh air. "Now, what are we going to do?" says Ginger. "I'm beginning to be sick of the sight of him. Have we got to lead him about all day on a bit o' string?" "Let's take him round the corner and lose of him," says Peter Russet. "You give me a hold o' that string," says Sam. "If you don't want shares, that's all right. If I'm going to look arter him I'll have it all." That made Ginger and Peter look at each other. Directly Sam began to talk about money they began to think they might be losing something. "And what about having him in our bedroom and keeping us awake all night?" says Peter. "And putting it onto me with the toothache," says Ginger. "No, you can look arter him, Sam, while me and Peter goes off and enjoys ourselves, and if you get anything we go shares, mind." "All right," says Sam, turning away with the dog. "And suppose Sam gets a reward or sells it, and then tells us that it ran away and he lost it," says Peter. "Oh, of course, I never thought o' that," says Ginger. "You've got your head on straight, Peter. I see him smile, that's why," says Peter Russet. "You're a liar," says Sam. "We'll stick together," says Ginger. "Leastways, one of us keep with you, Sam." They settled it that way at last, and while Ginger went for a walk down round about where they had found the dog, Sam Small and Peter waited for him in a little public house down Limehouse way. Their idea was that there would be bills up, and when Ginger came back and said there wasn't, they had a lot to say about people what wasn't fit to have dogs because they didn't love them. They had a miserable day. When the dog got sick o' sitting in a pub, he made such a noise they had to take him out, and when he got tired o' walking about he sat down on the pavement and they had to drag him along to the nearest pub again. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon Ginger Dick was talking about 2 penn'orth o' rat poison. "What are we to do with him till 12 o'clock tonight?" says Peter. "And suppose we can't smuggle him into the house again," says Ginger. "Or suppose he makes that noise again in the night?" They had a pint each to set them to think what was to be done. And, arter a lot o' talking and quarrelling, they did what a lot of other people have done when they got into trouble, they came to me. I had only been on duty about half an hour when the 3 of 'em turned up at the wharf with the dog, and, arter saying, "Oh well, I looked and that I seemed to get younger every time they saw me," they asked me to take charge of the dog for 'em. "It'll be company for you," says old Sam. "It must be very lonely there of a night." "I've often thought of it." "And of a daytime you could take it home and tie it up in your backyard," says Ginger. "I wouldn't have anything to do with it at first, but at last I gave way. They offered me 4pence a day for its keep, and, as I didn't want to run any risk, I made 'em give me a couple o's bob to go on with. They went off as though they'd left a load och care behind 'em, and arter tying the dog up to a crane I went on with my work. They'd adn't told me what the game was, but, from 1 or 2 things they'd let drop, I'd got a pretty good idea. The dog yowled a bit at first, but he quieted down arter a bit. He was a nice-looking animal, but one dog is much the same as another to me, and if I had one 10 years I don't suppose I could pick it out from 2 or 3 others. I took it off home with me when I left at 6 o'clock next morning, and tied it up in my yard. My missus had words about it, oh, 'course, that's what people get married for, but when she found it woke me up 3 times she quieted down and said what a nice coat it had got. The 3 of 'em came round next evening to see it, and they were so afraid of its being lost that when they stood me a pint at the Bull's Head we had to take it with us. Ginger was going to buy a sausage roll for it, but arter Sam had pointed out that they was paying me 4p a day for its keep, he didn't. And Sam had the cheek to tell me that it liked a nice bit o' the fried steak as well as anything. A lot o' people admired that dog. I remember, on the fourth night I think it was, the barge Dauntless came alongside, and arter she was made fast the skipper came ashore and took a little notice of it. "Where did you get him?" he says. I told him, it was, and he stood there for some time patting the dog on the lead and whistling under his breath. "It's much the same size as my dog," he says, "that's a black retriever, too." I says, "Oh. I'm afraid I shall have to get rid of it," he says. "It's on the barge now. My missus won't have it in the house any more 'cause it bit the baby. And of course it was no good pointing out that it was its first bite. Even the law allows one bite, but it's no good talking about the law to them men. Except when it's on their side," I says. He patted the dog's head again and whistled, and a big black dog came up out of the cabin and sprang ashore. It went up and put its nose to Sam's dog, and they both growled like thunderstorms. "Might be brothers," says the skipper, "only your dog's got a better head and a better coat. It's a good dog." "They're all alike to me," I says. "I couldn't tell 'em apart, not if you paid me." The skipper stood there a moment, and then he says, "I wish you'd let me see how my dog looks in your dog's collar," he says. "Waffer?" I says. "Onny fancy," he says. "Oh, Bill." "Yes," I says. "It ain't Christmas," he says, taking my arm and walking up and down a bit, "but it will be soon, and then I mightn't see you. You've done me one or two good turns, and I should like to make you a Christmas box of $3.50. I let him give yem to me, and then, just to please him, I let him try the collar on his dog, while I swept up a bit. It looked beautiful on him," he says, when I'd finished, "but I've put it back again. Come on, Bruno. Good night, Bill." He got his dog on the barge again arter a bit of trouble, and arter making sure that my dog had got its own collar on I went on with my work. The dog didn't seem to be quite himself next day, and he was so fierce in the yard that my missus was afraid to go near him. I was going to ask the skipper about it, as he seemed to know more about dogs than I did, but when I got to the wharf the barge had sailed. It was just getting dark when there came a ring at the gate bell, and afore I could answer it 6 more, as fast as the bell could go. And when I opened the wicket Sam Small and Ginger and Peter Russet all tried to get in at once. "Where's the dog?" says Sam. "Tied up," I says. "What's the matter? Are you all gone mad?" They didn't answer me. They ran onto the jetty, and afore I could turn round a'most they had got the dog loose and was dragging it towards me, smiling all over their faces. "Reward," says Ginger, as I caught hold of him by the coat. £5, landlord of a pub at Bow, come on, Sam." "Why don't you keep your mouth shut, Ginger?" says Sam. £5. I says. £5. Hurrah! "What are you hurraying about?" says Sam, very short. "Why," I says, "I suppose, here, off a moment." "Can't stop," says Sam, going arter the others. I watched as em up the road, and then I locked the gate and walked up and down the wharf thinking what a funny thing money is, and it alters people's natures. And after all, I thought that $3.50 earned honest was better than a reward for hiding another man's dog. I finished tidying up, and at 9 o'clock I went into the office for a quiet smoke. I couldn't help wondering both them three had got on, and just as I was thinking about it there came the worst ringing at the gate bell I've ever heard in my life, and the noise of heavy boots kicking the gate. It was so violent I oddly liked to go at first, thinking it might be bad news, but I opened it at last, and in bust Sam Small, with Ginger and Peter. For 5 minutes they all talked at once, with their nasty fists LELD under my nose. I couldn't make deed or tail of it at first, and then I found as they had got the dog back with them, and that the landlord had said he wasn't the one. But he said as he thought the collar was his, says Sam. "Oh, do you account for that?" "Perhaps he made a mistake," I says, "or perhaps he thought you'd turn the dog adrift and he'd get it back for nothing." You know what landlords are. Try him again. You take him back tomorrow night, I says. It's a nice walk to Bow. And then come back and beg my pardon. I want to have a word with this policeman here. Good night. The weaker vessel. Mr. Gribble sat in his small front parlour in a state of angry amazement. It was 6:30 and there was no Mrs. Gribble, worse still, there was no tea. It was a state of things that had only happened once before. That was 3 weeks after marriage, and on that occasion Mr. Gribble had put his foot down with a bang that had echoed down the corridors of 30 years. The fire in the little kitchen was out, and the untidy remains of Mrs. Gribble's midday meal still disgraced the table. More and more dazed, the indignant husband could only come to the conclusion that she had gone out and been run over. Other things might possibly account for her behavior, that was the only one that would excuse it. His meditations were interrupted by the sound of a key in the front door, and a second later a small, anxious figure entered the room and, leaning against the table, strove to get its breath. The process was not helped by the alarming distension of Mr. Gribble's figure. I got home, quick as I could, Henry, said Mrs. Gribble, panting. Where is my tea? Demanded her husband. What do you mean by it? The fire's out and the kitchen is just as you left it. I've been to a lawyer's, Henry, said Mrs. Gribble, and I had to wait. Lawyers, repeated her husband. I got a letter this afternoon telling me to call. Poor Uncle George, that went to America, is gone. That is no excuse for neglecting me, said Mr. Gribble. Of course people die when they are old. Is that the one that got on and made money? His wife, apparently struggling to repress a little excitement, nodded. He's left me £200 a year for life, Henry, she said, dabbing at her pale blue eyes with a handkerchief. They're going to pay it monthly, £16, 13 shillings and 4p a month. That's how he left it. £200, began Mr. Gribble, forgetting himself. £200, go and get my tea. If you think you're going to give yourself airs because your uncle's left you money, you won't do it in my house. He took a chair by the window, and, while his wife busied herself in the kitchen, sat gazing in blank delight at the little street. £200 a year! It was all he could do to resume his wonted expression as his wife re-entered the room and began to lay the table. His manner, however, when she let a cup and saucer slip from her trembling fingers to smash on the floor, left nothing to be desired. It's nice to have money come to us in our old age, said Mrs. Gribble, timidly, as they sat at tea. It takes a load off my mind. Old age, said her husband, disagreeably. What do ye mean by old age? I'm 52, and feel as young as ever I did. You look as young as ever you did, said the docile Mrs. Gribble. I can't see no change in you. At least, not to speak of. Not so much talk, said her husband. When I want your opinion of my looks, I'll ask you for it. When do you start getting this money? Tuesday week, 1st of May, replied his wife. The lawyers are going to send it by registered letter. Mr. Gribble grunted. I shall be sorry to leave the house for some things, said his wife, looking round. We've been here a good many years now, Henry. Leave the house, repeated Mr. Gribble, putting down his teacup and staring at her. Leave the house? What are you talking about? But we can't stay here, Henry, faltered Mrs. Gribble. Not with all that money. They are building some beautiful houses in Charlton Grove now, bathroom, tiled hearths, and beautiful stained glass in the front door, and all for £28 a year. Wonderful, said the other, with a mocking glint in his eye. And iron palings to the front garden, painted chocolate colour picked out with blue, continued his wife, eyeing him wistfully. Mr. Gribble struck the table a blow with his fist. This house is good enough for me, he roared, and what's good enough for me is good enough for you. You want to waste money on show, that's what you want. Stained glass and bow windows. You want a bow window to loll about in, do you? Shouldn't wonder if you don't want a servant gal to do the work. Mrs. Gribble flushed guiltily, and caught her breath. We're going to live as we've always lived, pursued Mr. Gribble. Money ain't going to spoil me. I ain't going to put on no side just because I've come in for a little bit. If you had your way, we should end up in the workhouse. He filled his pipe and smoked thoughtfully, while Mrs. Gribble cleared away the tea things and washed up. Pictures, good to look upon, formed in the smoke, pictures of a hale, hearty man walking along the Primrose Path arm in arm with 200 a year, of the mahogany and plush of the saloon bar at the Grafton Arms, of Sunday jaunts, and the Oval on summer afternoons. He ate his breakfast slowly on the 1st of the month, and, the meal finished, took a seat in the window with his pipe and waited for the postman. Mrs. Gribble's timid reminders concerning the flight of time and consequent fines for lateness at work fell on deaf ears. He jumped up suddenly and met the postman at the door. "Has it come?" inquired Mrs. Gribble, extending her hand. By way of reply her husband tore open the envelope and, handing her the covering letter, counted the notes and coin and placed them slowly in his pockets. Then, as Mrs. Gribble looked at him, he looked at the clock, and, snatching up his hat, set off down the road. He was late home that evening, and his manner forbade conversation. Mrs. Gribble, with the bereaved air of one who has sustained an irremediable loss, sighed fitfully, and once applied her handkerchief to her eyes. "That's no good," said her husband at last, "that won't bring him back." "Bring who back?" inquired Mrs. Gribble, in genuine surprise. "Why, your Uncle George," said Mr. Gribble. "That's what you're turning on the water cart for, ain't it?" "I wasn't thinking of him," said Mrs. Gribble, trying to speak bravely. "I was thinking of—" "Well, you ought to be," interrupted her husband. "He wasn't my uncle, poor chap, but I've been thinking of him, off and on, all day. That bloater paste you are eating now came from his kindness. I brought it home as a treat." "I was thinking of my clothes," said Mrs. Gribble, clenching her hands together under the table. "When I found I had come in for that money, the first thing I thought was that I should be able to have a decent dress. My old ones are quite worn out, and as for my hat and jacket—" "Go on," said her husband, fiercely. "Go on." "That's just what I said, trust you with money, and we should be poorer than ever." "I'm ashamed to be seen out," said Mrs. Gribble. "A woman's place is the home," said Mr. Gribble, "and so long as I'm satisfied with your appearance nobody else matters. So long as I am pleased, that's everything. What do you want to go dressing yourself up for? Nothing looks worse than an overdressed woman." "What are we going to do with all that money, then?" inquired Mrs. Gribble, in trembling tones. "That'll do," said Mr. Gribble, decidedly. "That'll do. 1 these days you'll go too far. You start throwing that money in my teeth and see what happens. I've done my best for you all these years, and there's no reason to suppose I shan't go on doing so." "What did you say?" "What?" Mrs. Gribble turned to him, a face rendered ghastly by terror. I said, it was my money," she stammered. Mr. Gribble rose, and stood for a full minute regarding her. Then, kicking a chair out of his way, he took his hat from its peg in the passage and, with a bang of the street door that sent a current of fresh, sweet air circulating through the house, strode off to the Grafton Arms. It was past 11 when he returned, but even the spectacle of his wife laboriously darning her old dress failed to reduce his good humor in the slightest degree. In a frivolous mood he even took a feather from the dismembered hat on the table and stuck it in his hair. He took the stump of a strong cigar from his lips and, exhaling a final cloud of smoke, tossed it into the fireplace. "Uncle George dead," he said, at last, shaking his head. "Hadn't pleasure acquaintance, but good man. Good man." He shook his head again and gazed mistily at his wife. "He was a teetotaler," she remarked, casually. "He was teetotaler," repeated Mr. Gribble, regarding her equably. "Good man. Uncle George dead, teetotaler." Mrs. Gribble gathered up her work and began to put it away. "Bedtime," said Mr. Gribble, and led the way upstairs, singing. His good humor had evaporated by the morning, and, having made a light breakfast of 5 cups of tea, he went off, with lagging steps, to work. It was a beautiful spring morning, and the idea of a man with 200 a year and a headache going off to a warehouse instead of a day's outing seemed to border upon the absurd. What use was money without freedom? His toil was sweetened that day by the knowledge that he could drop it any time he liked and walk out, a free man, into the sunlight. By the end of a week his mind was made up. Each day that passed made his hurried uprising and scrambled breakfast more and more irksome, and on Monday morning, with hands in trouser pockets and legs stretched out, he leaned back in his chair and received his wife's alarming intimations as to the flight of time with a superior and sphinx-like smile. "It's too fine to go to work today," he said, lazily. "Come to that, any day is too fine to waste at work." Mrs. Gribble sat gasping at him. "So on Saturday I gave Em a week's notice," continued her husband, "and after Potts and Company had listened while I told Em what I thought of Em, they said they'd do without the week's notice." "You've never given up your job," said Mrs. Gribble. "I spoke to old Potts as one gentleman of independent means to another," said Mr. Gribble, smiling. 35 bob a week after 20 years' service. And he had the cheek to tell me I wasn't worth that. When I told him what he was worth, he talked about sending for the police. What are you looking like that for? I've worked hard for you for 30 years, and I've had enough of it. Now it's your turn. You'd find it hard to get another place at your age, said his wife, especially if they wouldn't give you a good character. Place, said the other, staring. Place. I tell you I've done with work. For a man owes my means to go on working for 35 bob a week is ridiculous. But suppose anything happened to me, said his wife, in a troubled voice. That's not very likely, said Mr. Gribble. You're tough enough. And if it did, your money would come to me. Mrs. Gribble shook her head. What? Roared her husband, jumping up. I've only got it for life, Henry, as I told you, said Mrs. Gribble, in alarm. I thought you knew it would stop when I died. And what's to become of me if anything happens to you, then, demanded the dismayed Mr. Gribble. What am I to do? Mrs. Gribble put her handkerchief to her eyes. And don't start weakening your constitution by crying, shouted the incensed husband. What are you mumbling? I said, let's hope you'll go first, sobbed his wife. Then it will be all right. Mr. Gribble opened his mouth and then, realizing the inadequacy of the English language for moments of stress, closed it again. He broke his silence at last in favor of Uncle George. Mind you, he said, concluding a peroration which his wife listened to with her fingers in her ears, mind you, I reckon I've been absolutely done by you and your precious Uncle George. I've given up a good situation, and now, any time you fancy to go off the hooks, I'm to be turned into the street. I'll try and live, for your sake, Henry, said his wife. Think of my worry every time you are ill, pursued the indignant Mr. Gribble. Mrs. Gribble sighed, and her husband, after a few further remarks concerning Uncle George, his past and his future, announced his intention of going to the lawyers and seeing whether anything could be done. He came back in a state of voiceless gloom, and spent the rest of a beautiful day indoors, smoking a pipe which had lost much of its flavor, and regarding with a critical and anxious eye the small, weedy figure of his wife as she went about her work. The second month's payment went into his pocket as a matter of course, but on this occasion Mrs. Gribble made no requests for new clothes or change of residence. A little nervous cough was her sole comment. Got a cold? Inquired her husband, starting. I don't think so, replied his wife, and, surprised and touched at this unusual display of interest, coughed again. Is it your throat or your chest? He inquired, gruffly. Mrs. Gribble coughed again to see. After 5 coughs she said she thought it was her chest. You'd better not go out doors today, then, said Mr. Gribble. Don't stand about in draughts, and I'll fetch you in a bottle of cough mixture when I go out. What about a lay down on the sofa? His wife thanked him, and, reaching the sofa, watched with half-closed eyes as he cleared the breakfast table. It was the first time he had done such a thing in his life, and a little honest pride in the possession of such a cough would not be denied. Dim possibilities of its vast usefulness suddenly occurred to her. She took the cough mixture for a week, by which time other symptoms, extremely disquieting to an ease-loving man, had manifested themselves. Going upstairs deprived her of breath, carrying a loaded tea tray produced a long and alarming stitch in the side. The last time she ever filled the coal scuttle she was discovered sitting beside it on the floor in a state of collapse. You'd better go and see the doctor, said Mr. Gribble. Mrs. Gribble went. Years before, the doctor had told her that she ought to take life easier, and she was now able to tell him she was prepared to take his advice. "And, you see, I must take care of myself now for the sake of my husband," she said, after she had explained matters. "I understand," said the doctor. "If anything happened to me," began the patient. "Nothing shall happen," said the other. "Stay in bed tomorrow morning, and I'll come round and overhaul you." Mrs. Gribble hesitated. "You might examine me and think I was all right," she objected, "and at the same time you wouldn't know how I feel." "I know just how you feel," was the reply. "Goodbye." He came round the following morning and, following the dejected Mr. Gribble upstairs, made a long and thorough investigation of his patient. "Say 99, he said, adjusting his stethoscope. Mrs. Gribble ticked off 99s until her husband's ears ached with them. The doctor finished at last, and, fastening his bag, stood with his beard in his hand, pondering. He looked from the little, white-faced woman on the bed to the bulky figure of Mr. Gribble. "You had better lie up for a week," he said, decidedly. "The rest will do you good." "Nothing serious, I suppose," said Mr. Gribble, as he led the way downstairs to the small parlour. "She ought to be all right with care," was the reply. "Care," repeated the other, distastefully. "What's the matter with her?" "She's not very strong," said the doctor, "and hearts don't improve with age, you know. Under favourable conditions she's good for some years yet. The great thing is never to thwart her. Let her have her own way in everything." "Own way in everything," repeated the dumbfounded Mr. Gribble. The doctor nodded. "Never let her worry about anything," he continued, "and, above all, never find fault with her." "Not," said Mr. Gribble, thickly, "not even for her own good. Unless you want to run the risk of losing her." Mr. Gribble shivered. "Let her have an easy time," said the doctor, taking up his hat. "Pamper her a bit if you like, it won't hurt her. Above all, don't let that heart of hers get excited." He shook hands with the petrified Mr. Gribble and went off, grinning wickedly. He had few favourites, and Mr. Gribble was not one of them. For 2 days the devoted husband did the housework and waited on the invalid. Then he wearied, and, at his wife's suggestion, a small girl was engaged as servant. She did most of the nursing as well, and, having a great love for the sensational, took a grave view of her mistress's condition. It was a relief to Mr. Gribble when his wife came downstairs again, and he was cheered to see that she looked much better. His satisfaction was so marked that it brought on her cough again. "It's this house, I think," she said, with a resigned smile. "It never did agree with me." "Well, you've lived in it a good many years," said her husband, controlling himself with difficulty. "It's rather dark and small," said Mrs. Gribble. "Not but what it is good enough for me. And I dare say it will last my time." "Nonsense," said her husband, gruffly. "You want to get out a bit more. You've got nothing to do now we are wasting all this money on a servant. Why don't you go out for little walks?" Mrs. Gribble went, after several promptings, and the fruit of one of them was handed by the postman to Mr. Gribble a few days afterwards. Half choking with wrath and astonishment, he stood over his trembling wife with the first draper's bill he had ever received. £1 2s and 3d 3 farthings, he recited. "It must be a mistake. It must be for somebody else." Mrs. Gribble, with her hand to her heart, tottered to the sofa and lay there with her eyes closed. "I had to get some dress material," she said, in a quavering voice. "You want me to go out, and I'm so shabby I'm ashamed to be seen." Mr. Gribble made muffled noises in his throat, then, afraid to trust himself, he went into the backyard and, taking a seat on an upturned bucket, sat with his head in his hands peering into the future. The dressmaker's bill and a bill for a new hat came after the next monthly payment, and a bill for shoes came a week later. Hoping much from the well-known curative effects of fine feathers, he managed to treat the affair with dignified silence. The only time he allowed full play to his feelings Mrs. Gribble took to her bed for 2 days, and the doctor had a heart-to-heart talk with him on the doorstep. It was a matter of great annoyance to him that his wife still continued to attribute her ill health to the smallness and darkness of the house, and the fact that there were only 2 of the houses in Charlton Grove left caused a marked depression of spirits. It was clear that she was fretting. The small servant went further and said that she was fading away. They moved at the September quarter, and a slight, but temporary, improvement in Mrs. Gribble's health took place. Her cheeks flushed and her eyes sparkled over new curtains and new linoleum. The tiled hearths and stained glass in the front door filled her with a deep and solemn thankfulness. The only thing that disturbed her was the fact that Mr. Gribble, to avoid wasting money over necessaries, contrived to spend an unduly large portion on personal luxuries. "We ought to have some new things for the kitchen," she said one day. "No money," said Mr. Gribble, laconically. "And a mat for the bathroom." Mr. Gribble got up and went out. She had to go to him for everything. 200 a year and not a penny she could call her own. She consulted her heart, and that faithful organ responded with a bound that set her nerves quivering. If she could only screw her courage to the sticking point, the question would be settled for once and all. White and trembling, she sat at breakfast on the 1st of November, waiting for the postman, while the unconscious Mr. Gribble went on with his meal. The double knocks down the road came nearer and nearer, and Mr. Gribble, wiping his mouth, sat upright with an air of alert and pleased interest. Rapid steps came to the front door, and a double bang followed. "Always punctual," said Mr. Gribble, good-humouredly. His wife made no reply, but, taking a blue-crossed envelope from the maid in her shaking fingers, looked round for a knife. Her gaze encountered Mr. Gribble's outstretched hand. "After you," he said sharply. Mrs. Gribble found the knife, and, hacking tremulously at the envelope, peeped inside it and, with her gaze fastened on the window, fumbled for her pocket. She was so pale and shook so much that the words died away on her husband's lips. "It is all right," gasped his wife. She put her hand to her throat and, hardly able to believe in her victory, sat struggling for breath. Before her, grim and upright, her husband sat, a figure of helpless smouldering wrath. "You might lose it," he said, at last. "I shan't lose it," said his wife. To avoid further argument, she arose and went slowly upstairs. Through the doorway Mr. Gribble saw her helping herself up by the banisters, her left hand still at her throat. Then he heard her moving slowly about in the bedroom overhead. He took out his pipe and filled it mechanically, and was just holding a match to the tobacco when he paused and gazed with a puzzled air at the ceiling. "Blamed if it don't sound like somebody dancing," he growled. "Stepping backwards." "Wonderful improvement," said Mr. Jack Mills. "Show them to me again." Mr. Simpson took his pipe from his mouth and, parting his lips, revealed his new teeth. "And you talk better," said Mr. Mills, taking his glass from the counter and emptying it. "You ain't got that silly lisp you used to have." "What does your missus think of them?" "She hasn't seen Rem yet," said the other. "I had them put in at dinner time. I ate my dinner with them." Mr. Mills expressed his admiration. "If it wasn't for your white hair and whiskers you'd look 30 again," he said, slowly. "How old are you?" 53, said his friend. "If it wasn't for being laughed at, I've often thought of having my whiskers shaved off and my hair dyed black. People think I'm 60? Or 70, continued Mr. Mills. "What does it matter, people laughing? You've got a splendid head of hair, and it would dye beautiful." Mr. Simpson shook his head and, ordering a couple of glasses of bitter, attacked his in silence. "It might be done gradual," he said, after a long interval. "It don't do anybody good at the warehouse to look old." "Make a clean job of it," counselled Mr. Mills, who was very fond of a little cheap excitement. "Get it over and done with. You've got good features, and you'd look splendid clean-shaved." Mr. Simpson smiled faintly. "Only on Wednesday the barmaid here was asking after you," pursued Mr. Mills. Mr. Simpson smiled again. "She says to me, 'Where's Grandpa?' she says, and when I says, haughty-like, 'Who do you mean?' she says, 'Father Christmas.' If you was to tell her that you are only 53, she'd laugh in your face." "Let her laugh," said the other, sourly. "Come out and get it off," said Mr. Mills, earnestly. "There's a barber's in Bird Street. You could go in the little back room, where he charges a penny more, and get it done without anybody being a bit the wiser." He put his hand on Mr. Simpson's shoulder, and that gentleman, with a glare in the direction of the fair but unconscious offender, rose in a hypnotized fashion and followed him out. Twice on the way to Bird Street Mr. Simpson paused and said he had altered his mind, and twice did the propulsion of Mr. Mills's right hand, and his flattering argument, make him alter it again. It was a matter of relief to Mr. Simpson that the barber took his instructions without any show of surprise. It appeared, indeed, that an elderly man of 78 had enlisted his services for a similar purpose not 2 months before, and had got married 6 weeks afterwards. Age of the bride given as 24, but said to have looked older. A snip of the scissors, and 6 inches of white beard fell to the floor. For the first time in 30 years Mr. Simpson felt a razor on his face. Then his hair was cut and shampooed, and an hour later he sat gazing at a dark-haired, clean-shaven man in the glass who gazed back at him with wondering eyes, a lean-jawed, good-looking man, who, in a favorable light, might pass for 40. He turned and met the admiring eyes of Mr. Mills. "What did I tell you?" inquired the latter. "You look young enough to be your own son." "Or grandson," said the barber, with professional pride. Mr. Simpson got up slowly from the chair and, accompanied by the admiring Mr. Mills, passed out into the street. The evening was young, and, at his friend's suggestion, they returned to the Plume of Feathers. "You give the order," said Mr. Mills, "and see whether she recognizes you." Mr. Simpson obeyed. "Don't you know him?" inquired Mr. Mills, as the barmaid turned away. "I don't think I have that pleasure," said the girl, simpering. "Grandpa's eldest boy," said Mr. Mills. "Oh," said the girl. "Well, I hope he's a better man than his father, then." "What do you mean by that?" demanded Mr. Simpson, painfully conscious of his friend's regards. "Nothing," said the girl, "nothing. Only we can all be better, can't we? He's a nice old gentleman, so simple." "Don't know you from Adam," said Mr. Mills, as she turned away. "Now, if you ask me, I don't believe as your own missus will recognize you." "Rubbish," said Mr. Simpson. "My wife would know me anywhere. We've been married over 30 years. 30 years of sunshine and shadow together. You're a single man, and don't understand these things." "Perhaps you're right," said his friend. "But it'll be a bit of a shock to her, anyway. What do you say to me stepping round and breaking the news to her? It's a bit sudden, you know. She's expecting a white-haired old gentleman, not a black-haired boy." Mr. Simpson looked a bit uneasy. "Perhaps I ought to have told her first," he murmured, craning his neck to look in the glass at the back of the bar. "I'll go and put it right for you," said his friend. "You stay here and smoke your pipe." He stepped out briskly, but his pace slackened as he drew near the house. I came to see you about your husband," he faltered, as Mrs. Simpson opened the door and stood regarding him. "What's the matter?" she exclaimed, with a faint cry. "What's happened to him?" "Nothing," said Mr. Mills, hastily. "Nothing serious, that is. I just came round to warn you so that you will be able to know it's him." Mrs. Simpson let off a shriek that set his ears tingling. Then, steadying herself by the wall, she tottered into the front room, followed by the discomfited Mr. Mills, and sank into a chair. "He's dead," she sobbed. "He's dead." "He is not," said Mr. Mills. "Is he much hurt?" "Is he dying?" gasped Mrs. Simpson. "Only his hair," said Mr. Mills, clutching at the opening. "He is not hurt at all." Mrs. Simpson dabbed at her eyes and sat regarding him in bewilderment. Her twin chins were still quivering with emotion, but her eyes were beginning to harden. "What are you talking about?" she inquired, in a raspy voice. "He's been to a hairdresser's," said Mr. Mills. "He's had all his white whiskers cut off, and his hair cut short and dyed black. And, what with that and his new teeth, he thought, perhaps you mightn't know him when he came home." "Died," cried Mrs. Simpson, starting to her feet. Mr. Mills nodded. "He looks 20 years younger," he said, with a smile. "He'd pass for his own son anywhere." Mrs. Simpson's eyes snapped. "Perhaps he'd pass for my son," she remarked. "Yes, easy," said the tactful Mr. Mills. You can't think what a difference it's made to him. That's why I came to see you, so you shouldn't be startled. Thank you, said Mrs. Simpson. I'm much obliged. But you might have spared yourself the trouble. I should know my husband anywhere. Ah, that's what you think, retorted Mr. Mills, with a smile, but the barmaid at the Plume didn't. That's what made me come to you. Mrs. Simpson gazed at him. I says to myself, continued Mr. Mills, if she don't know him, I'm certain his missus won't, and I'd better. You'd better go, interrupted his hostess. Mr. Mills started, and then, with much dignity, stalked after her to the door. As to your story, I don't believe a word of it, said Mrs. Simpson. Whatever else my husband is, he isn't a fool, and he'd no more think of cutting off his whiskers and dyeing his hair than you would of telling the truth. Seeing is believing, said the offended Mr. Mills, darkly. I'll wait till I do see, and then I shan't believe, was the reply. It is a put-up job between you and some other precious idiot, I expect. But you can't deceive me. If your black-haired friend comes here, he'll get it, I can tell you. She slammed the door on his protests and, returning to the parlor, gazed fiercely into the glass on the mantelpiece. It reflected 16 stone of honest English womanhood, a thin wisp of yellowish-grey hair, and a pair of faded eyes peering through clumsy spectacles. Son, indeed, she said, her lips quivering. You wait till you come home, my lord. Mr. Simpson, with some forebodings, returned home an hour later. To a man who loved peace and quietness, the report of the indignant Mr. Mills was not of a reassuring nature. He hesitated on the doorstep for a few seconds while he fumbled for his key, and then, humming unconcernedly, hung his hat in the passage and walked into the parlor. The astonished scream of his wife warned him that Mr. Mills had by no means exaggerated. She rose from her seat and, crouching by the fireplace, regarded him with a mixture of anger and dismay. It's all right, Millie, said Mr. Simpson, with a smile that revealed a dazzling set of teeth. Who are you? Demanded Mrs. Simpson. How dare you call me by my Christian name? It's a good job for you my husband is not here. He wouldn't hurt me, said Mr. Simpson, with an attempt at facetiousness. He's the best friend I ever had. Why, we slept in the same cradle. I don't want any of your nonsense, said Mrs. Simpson. You get out of my house before I send for the police. How dare you come into a respectable woman's house in this fashion? Be off with you. Now, look here, Millie, began Mr. Simpson. His wife drew herself up to her full height of 4'11". I've had a haircut and a shave, pursued her husband, also I've had my hair restored to its natural color. But I'm the same man, and you know it. I know nothing of the kind, said his wife, doggedly. I don't know you from Adam. I've never seen you before, and I don't want to see you again. You go away. I'm your husband, and my place is at home, replied Mr. Simpson. A man can have a shave if he likes, can't he? Where's my supper? Go on, said his wife. Keep it up. But be careful my husband don't come in and catch you, that's all. Mr. Simpson gazed at her fixedly, and then, with an impatient exclamation, walked into the small kitchen and began to set the supper. A joint of cold beef, a jar of pickles, bread, butter, and cheese made an appetizing display. Then he took a jug from the dresser and descended to the cellar. A musical trickling fell on the ear of Mrs. Simpson as she stood at the parlor door, and drew her stealthily to the cellar. The key was in the lock, and, with a sudden movement, she closed the door and locked it. A sharp cry from Mr. Simpson testified to his discomfiture. Now I'm off for the police, cried his wife. Don't be a fool, shouted Mr. Simpson, tugging wildly at the door handle. Open the door. Mrs. Simpson remained silent, and her husband resumed his efforts until the doorknob, unused to such treatment, came off in his hand. A sudden scrambling noise on the cellar stairs satisfied the listener that he had not pulled it off intentionally. She stood for a few moments, considering. It was a stout door and opened inwards. She took her bonnet from its nail in the kitchen and, walking softly to the street door, set off to lay the case before a brother who lived a few doors away. Poor old Bill, said Mr. Cooper when she had finished. Still, it might be worse, he's got the barrel of beer with him. It's not Bill, said Mrs. Simpson. Mr. Cooper scratched his whiskers and looked at his wife. She ought to know, said the latter. We'll come and have a look at him, said Mr. Cooper. Mrs. Simpson pondered, and eyed him dubiously. Come in and have a bit of supper, she said at last. There's a nice piece of beef and pickles. And Bill, I mean the stranger, sitting on the beer barrel, said Mr. Cooper, gloomily. You can bring your beer with you, said his sister, sharply. Come along. Mr. Cooper grinned, and, placing a couple of bottles in his coat pockets, followed the two ladies to the house. Seated at the kitchen table, he grinned again, as a persistent drumming took place on the cellar door. His wife smiled, and a faint, sour attempt in the same direction appeared on the face of Mrs. Simpson. Open the door, bellowed an indignant voice. Open the door. Mrs. Simpson, commanding silence with an uplifted finger, proceeded to carve the beef. A rattle of knives and forks succeeded. Oh, Pen, the door, said the voice again. Not so much noise, commanded Mr. Cooper. I can't hear myself eat. Bob, said the voice, in relieved accents, Bob. Come and let me out. Mr. Cooper, putting a huge hand over his mouth, struggled nobly with his feelings. Who are you calling her, Bob? He demanded, in an unsteady voice. You keep yourself to yourself. I've heard all about you. You've got to stay there till my brother-in-law comes home. It's me, Bob, said Mr. Simpson, Bill. Yes, I dare say, said Mr. Cooper, but if you're Bill, why haven't you got Bill's voice? Let me out and look at me, said Mr. Simpson. There was a faint scream from both ladies, followed by protests. Don't be alarmed, said Mr. Cooper, reassuringly. I wasn't born yesterday. I don't want to get a crack over the head. It's all a mistake, Bob, said the prisoner, appealingly. I just had a shave and a haircut and a little hair dye. If you open the door you'll know me at once. How would it be, said Mr. Cooper, turning to his sister, and speaking with unusual distinctness, how would it be if you opened the door, and just as he put his head out I hit it a crack with the poker? You try it on, said the voice behind the door, hotly. You know who I am well enough, Bob Cooper. I don't want any more of your nonsense. Millie has put you up to this. If your wife don't know you, how do you think I can, said Mr. Cooper. Now, look here, you keep quiet till my brother-in-law comes home. If he don't come home perhaps we shall be more likely to think you're him. If he's not home by tomorrow morning we, HSH. HSH. Don't you know there's ladies present? That settles it, said Mrs. Cooper, speaking for the first time. My brother-in-law would never talk like that. I should never forgive him if he did, said her husband, piously. He poured himself out another glass of beer and resumed his supper with relish. Conversation turned on the weather, and from that to the price of potatoes. Frantic efforts on the part of the prisoner to join in the conversation and give it a more personal turn were disregarded. Finally he began to kick with monotonous persistency on the door. Stop it, shouted Mr. Cooper. I won't, said Mr. Simpson. The noise became unendurable. Mr. Cooper, who had just lit his pipe, laid it on the table and looked round at his companions. He'll have the door down soon, he said, rising. Hello, there. Hello, said the other. You say you're Bill Simpson, said Mr. Cooper, holding up a forefinger at Mrs. Simpson, who was about to interrupt. If you are, tell us something you know that only you could know, something we know, so as to identify you. Things about your past. A strange noise sounded behind the door. Sounds as though he is smacking his lips, said Mrs. Cooper to her sister-in-law, who was eyeing Mr. Cooper restlessly. Very good, said Mr. Simpson, I agree. Who is there? Me and my wife and Mrs. Simpson, said Mr. Cooper. He is smacking his lips, whispered Mrs. Cooper. Having a go at the beer, perhaps. Let's go back 15 years, said Mr. Simpson in meditative tones. Do you remember that girl with copper-colored hair that used to live in John Street? No, said Mr. Cooper, loudly and suddenly. Do you remember coming to me one day, 2 days after Valentine's Day? It was white as chalk and shaking like a leaf, and "No," roared Mr. Cooper. "Very well, I must try something else, then," said Mr. Simpson, philosophically. "Carry your mind back 10 years, Bob Cooper." "Look here," said Mr. Cooper, turning round with a ghastly smile. "We'd better get off home, Mary. I don't like interfering in other people's concerns." "Never did." "You stay where you are," said his wife. 10 years, repeated the voice behind the door. There was a new barmaid at the Crown, and one night you. "If I listen to any more of this nonsense I shall burst," remarked Mr. Cooper, plaintively. "Go on," prompted Mrs. Cooper, grimly. "One night." "Never mind," said Mr. Simpson. "It doesn't matter." "But does he identify me? Because if not, I've got a lot more things I can try." The harassed Mr. Cooper looked around appealingly. "How do you expect me to recognize you?" he began, and stopped suddenly. "Go back to your courting days, then," said Mr. Simpson, "when Mrs. Cooper wasn't Mrs. Cooper, but only wanted to be." Mrs. Cooper shivered, so did Mr. Cooper. "And you came round to me for advice," pursued Mr. Simpson, in reminiscent accents, "because there was another girl you wasn't sure of, and you didn't want to lose them both. Do you remember sitting with the 2 photographs, one on each knee, and trying to make up your mind?" "Wonderful imagination," said Mr. Cooper, smiling in a ghastly fashion at his wife. "Hark at him." "I am harking," said Mrs. Cooper. "Am I Bill Simpson or am I not?" demanded Mr. Simpson. "Bill was always fond of his joke," said Mr. Cooper, with a glance at the company that would have moved an oyster. "He was always fond of making up things. You're like him in that. What do you think, Millie?" "It's not my husband," said Mrs. Simpson. "Tell us something about her," said Mr. Cooper, hastily. "I daren't," said Mr. Simpson. "Doesn't that prove I'm her husband? But I'll tell you things about your wife, if you like." "You dare," said Mrs. Cooper, turning crimson as she realized what confidences might have passed between husband and wife. "If you say a word of your lies about me, I don't know what I won't do to you." "Very well, I must go on about Bob, then, till he recognizes me," said Mr. Simpson, patiently. "Carry your mind." "Open the door and let him out," shouted Mr. Cooper, turning to his sister. "How can I recognize a man through a deal door?" Mrs. Simpson, after a little hesitation, handed him the key, and the next moment her husband stepped out and stood blinking in the gaslight. "Do you recognize me?" he asked, turning to Mr. Cooper. "I do," said that gentleman, with a ferocious growl. "I'd know you anywhere," said Mrs. Cooper, with emphasis. "And you," said Mr. Simpson, turning to his wife. "You're not my husband," she said, obstinately. "Are you sure?" inquired Mr. Cooper. "Certain." "Very good, then," said her brother. "If he's not your husband, I'm going to knock his head off for telling them lies about me." He sprang forward and, catching Mr. Simpson by the collar, shook him violently until his head banged against the dresser. The next moment the hands of Mrs. Simpson were in the hair of Mr. Cooper. "How dare you knock my husband about?" she screamed, as Mr. Cooper let go and caught her fingers. "You've hurt him." "Concussion, I think," said Mr. Simpson, with great presence of mind. His wife helped him to a chair and, wetting her handkerchief at the tap, tenderly bathed the dyed head. Mr. Cooper, breathing hard, stood by watching until his wife touched him on the arm. "You come off home," she said, in a hard voice. "You ain't wanted. Are you going to stay here all night?" "I should like to," said Mr. Cooper, wistfully. The 3 sisters. 30 years ago on a wet autumn evening the household of Mallett's Lodge was gathered round the deathbed of Ursula Mallow, the eldest of the 3 sisters who inhabited it. The dingy moth-eaten curtains of the old wooden bedstead were drawn apart, the light of a smoking oil lamp falling upon the hopeless countenance of the dying woman as she turned her dull eyes upon her sisters. The room was in silence except for an occasional sob from the youngest sister, Eunice. Outside the rain fell steadily over the steaming marshes. "Nothing is to be changed, Tabitha," gasped Ursula to the other sister, who bore a striking likeness to her although her expression was harder and colder. this room is to be locked up and never opened." "Very well," said Tabitha brusquely, "though I don't see how it can matter to you then." "It does matter," said her sister with startling energy. "How do you know? How do I know that I may not sometimes visit it? I have lived in this house so long I am certain that I shall see it again. I will come back. Come back to watch over you both and see that no harm befalls you." "You are talking wildly," said Tabitha, by no means moved at her sister's solicitude for her welfare. "Your mind is wandering, you know that I have no faith in such things." Ursula sighed, and beckoning to Eunice, who was weeping silently at the bedside, placed her feeble arms around her neck and kissed her. "Do not weep, dear," she said feebly. "Perhaps it is best so. A lonely woman's life is scarce worth living. We have no hopes, no aspirations. Other women have had happy husbands and children, but we in this forgotten place have grown old together. I go first, but you must soon follow." Tabitha, comfortably conscious of only 40 years and an iron frame, shrugged her shoulders and smiled grimly. "I go first," repeated Ursula in a new and strange voice as her heavy eyes slowly closed, "but I will come for each of you in turn when your lease of life runs out. At that moment I will be with you to lead your steps whither I now go." As she spoke, the flickering lamp went out suddenly as though extinguished by a rapid hand, and the room was left in utter darkness. A strange suffocating noise issued from the bed, and when the trembling women had relighted the lamp, all that was left of Ursula Mallow was ready for the grave. That night the survivors passed together. The dead woman had been a firm believer in the existence of that shadowy borderland which is said to form an unhallowed link between the living and the dead, and even the stolid Tabitha, slightly unnerved by the events of the night, was not free from certain apprehensions that she might have been right. With the bright morning their fears disappeared. The sun stole in at the window, and seeing the poor earth-worn face on the pillow so touched it and glorified it that only its goodness and weakness were seen, and the beholders came to wonder how they could ever have felt any dread of aught so calm and peaceful. A day or two passed, and the body was transferred to a massive coffin long regarded as the finest piece of work of its kind ever turned out of the village carpenter's workshop. Then a slow and melancholy cortege headed by four bearers wound its solemn way across the marshes to the family vault in the grey old church, and all that was left of Ursula was placed by the father and mother who had taken that self-same journey some 30 years before. To Eunice as they toiled slowly home the day seemed strange and Sabbath-like, the flat prospect of marsh wilder and more forlorn than usual, the roar of the sea more depressing. Tabitha had no such fancies. The bulk of the dead woman's property had been left to Eunice, and her avaricious soul was sorely troubled and her proper sisterly feelings of regret for the deceased sadly interfered with in consequence. "What are you going to do with all that money, Eunice?" she asked as they sat at their quiet tea. "I shall leave it as it stands," said Eunice slowly. "We have both got sufficient to live upon, and I shall devote the income from it to supporting some beds in a children's hospital." "If Ursula had wished it to go to a hospital," said Tabitha in her deep tones, "she would have left the money to it herself. I wonder you do not respect her wishes more." "What else can I do with it then?" inquired Eunice. "Save it," said the other with gleaming eyes, "save it." Eunice shook her head. "No," said she, "it shall go to the sick children, but the principal I will not touch, and if I die before you it shall become yours and you can do what you like with it." "Very well," said Tabitha, smothering her anger by a strong effort, "I don't believe that was what Ursula meant you to do with it, and I don't believe she will rest quietly in the grave while you squander the money she stored so carefully." "What do you mean?" asked Eunice with pale lips. "You are trying to frighten me. I thought that you did not believe in such things." Tabitha made no answer, and to avoid the anxious inquiring gaze of her sister, drew her chair to the fire, and folding her gaunt arms, composed herself for a nap. For some time life went on quietly in the old house. The room of the dead woman, in accordance with her last desire, was kept firmly locked, its dirty windows forming a strange contrast to the prim cleanliness of the others. Tabitha, never very talkative, became more taciturn than ever, and stalked about the house and the neglected garden like an unquiet spirit, her brow roughened into the deep wrinkles suggestive of much thought. As the winter came on, bringing with it the long dark evenings, the old house became more lonely than ever, and an air of mystery and dread seemed to hang over it and brood in its empty rooms and dark corridors. The deep silence of night was broken by strange noises for which neither the wind nor the rats could be held accountable. Old Martha, seated in her distant kitchen, heard strange sounds upon the stairs, and once, upon hurrying to them, fancied that she saw a dark figure squatting upon the landing, though a subsequent search with candle and spectacles failed to discover anything. Eunice was disturbed by several vague incidents, and, as she suffered from a complaint of the heart, rendered very ill by them. Even Tabitha admitted a strangeness about the house, but, confident in her piety and virtue, took no heed of it, her mind being fully employed in another direction. Since the death of her sister, all restraint upon her was removed, and she yielded herself up entirely to the stern and hard rules enforced by avarice upon its devotees. Her housekeeping expenses were kept rigidly separate from those of Eunice, and her food limited to the coarsest dishes, while in the matter of clothes, the old servant was by far the better dressed. Seated alone in her bedroom, this uncouth, hard-featured creature revelled in her possessions, grudging even the expense of the candle end which enabled her to behold them. So completely did this passion change her that both Eunice and Martha became afraid of her, and lay awake in their beds night after night, trembling at the chinking of the coins at her unholy vigils. One day Eunice ventured to remonstrate. "Why don't you bank your money, Tabitha?" she said. "It is surely not safe to keep such large sums in such a lonely house." "Large sums," repeated the exasperated Tabitha, "large sums. What nonsense is this? You know well that I have barely sufficient to keep me." "It's a great temptation to housebreakers," said her sister, not pressing the point. "I made sure last night that I heard somebody in the house." "Did you?" said Tabitha, grasping her arm, a horrible look on her face. "So did I. I thought they went to Ursula's room, and I got out of bed and went on the stairs to listen." "Well," said Eunice faintly, fascinated by the look on her sister's face. "There was something there," said Tabitha slowly. "I'll swear it, for I stood on the landing by her door and listened, something scuffling on the floor round and round the room. At first I thought it was the cat, but when I went up there this morning the door was still locked, and the cat was in the kitchen." "Oh, let us leave this dreadful house," moaned Eunice. "What?" said her sister grimly, "afraid of poor Ursula? Why should you be? Your own sister who nursed you when you were a babe, and who perhaps even now comes and watches over your slumbers." "Oh," said Eunice, pressing her hand to her side, "if I saw her I should die. I should think that she had come for me as she said she would. Oh God! Have mercy on me, I am dying." She reeled as she spoke, and before Tabitha could save her, sank senseless to the floor. "Get some water," cried Tabitha, as old Martha came hurrying up the stairs. "Eunice has fainted." The old woman, with a timid glance at her, retired, reappearing shortly afterwards with the water, with which she proceeded to restore her much-loved mistress to her senses. Tabitha, as soon as this was accomplished, stalked off to her room, leaving her sister and Martha sitting drearily enough in the small parlour, watching the fire and conversing in whispers. It was clear to the old servant that this state of things could not last much longer, and she repeatedly urged her mistress to leave a house so lonely and so mysterious. To her great delight Eunice at length consented, despite the fierce opposition of her sister, and at the mere idea of leaving gained greatly in health and spirits. A small but comfortable house was hired in Morville, and arrangements made for a speedy change. It was the last night in the old house, and all the wild spirits of the marshes, the wind and the sea seemed to have joined forces for one supreme effort. When the wind dropped, as it did at brief intervals, the sea was heard moaning on the distant beach, strangely mingled with the desolate warning of the bellboy as it rocked to the waves. Then the wind rose again, and the noise of the sea was lost in the fierce gusts which, finding no obstacle on the open marshes, swept with their full fury upon the house by the creek. The strange voices of the air shrieked in its chimneys, windows rattled, doors slammed, and even the very curtains seemed to live and move. Eunice was in bed, awake. A small night-light in a saucer of oil shed a sickly glare upon the worm-eaten old furniture, distorting the most innocent articles into ghastly shapes. A wilder gust than usual almost deprived her of the protection afforded by that poor light, and she lay listening fearfully to the creakings and other noises on the stairs, bitterly regretting that she had not asked Martha to sleep with her. But it was not too late even now. She slipped hastily to the floor, crossed to the huge wardrobe, and was in the very act of taking her dressing-gown from its peg when an unmistakable footfall was heard on the stairs. The robe dropped from her shaking fingers, and with a quickly beating heart she regained her bed. The sound ceased and a deep silence followed, which she herself was unable to break although she strove hard to do so. A wild gust of wind shook the windows and nearly extinguished the light, and when its flame had regained its accustomed steadiness she saw that the door was slowly opening, while the huge shadow of a hand blotted the papered wall. Still her tongue refused its office. The door flew open with a crash, a cloaked figure entered and, throwing aside its coverings, she saw with a horror past all expression the napkin-bound face of the dead Ursula smiling terribly at her. In her last extremity she raised her faded eyes above for succor, and then as the figure noiselessly advanced and laid its cold hand upon her brow, the soul of Eunice Mallow left its body with a wild shriek and made its way to the eternal. Martha, roused by the cry, and shivering with dread, rushed to the door and gazed in terror at the figure which stood leaning over the bedside. As she watched, it slowly removed the cowl and the napkin and exposed the fell face of Tabitha, so strangely contorted between fear and triumph that she hardly recognized it. "Who's there?" cried Tabitha in a terrible voice as she saw the old woman's shadow on the wall. "I thought I heard a cry," said Martha, entering. "Did anybody call?" "Yes, Eunice," said the other, regarding her closely. "I, too, heard the cry, and hurried to her. What makes her so strange? Is she in a trance?" Said the old woman, falling on her knees by the bed and sobbing bitterly, "the trance of death. Ah, my dear, my poor lonely girl, that this should be the end of it." "She has died of fright," said the old woman, pointing to the eyes, which even yet retained their horror. "She has seen something devilish." Tabitha's gaze fell. "She has always suffered with her heart," she muttered. "The night has frightened her, it frightened me." She stood upright by the foot of the bed as Martha drew the sheet over the face of the dead woman. "First Ursula, then Eunice," said Tabitha, drawing a deep breath. "I can't stay here. I'll dress and wait for the morning." She left the room as she spoke, and with bent head proceeded to her own. Martha remained by the bedside, and gently closing the staring eyes, fell on her knees, and prayed long and earnestly for the departed soul. Overcome with grief and fear she remained with bowed head until a sudden sharp cry from Tabitha brought her to her feet. "Well," said the old woman, going to the door. "Where are you?" cried Tabitha, somewhat reassured by her voice. "In Miss Eunice's bedroom. Do you want anything? Come down at once. Quick! I am unwell." Her voice rose suddenly to a scream. "Quick! For God's sake! Quick, or I shall go mad. There is some strange woman in the house." The old woman stumbled hastily down the dark stairs. "What is the matter?" she cried, entering the room. "Who is it? What do you mean?" "I saw it," said Tabitha, grasping her convulsively by the shoulder. "I was coming to you when I saw the figure of a woman in front of me going up the stairs. Can it be Ursula come for the soul of Eunice, as she said she would?" "Or for yours," said Martha, the words coming from her in some odd fashion, despite herself. Tabitha, with a ghastly look, fell cowering by her side, clutching tremulously at her clothes. "Light the lamps," she cried hysterically. "Light a fire, make a noise, oh, this dreadful darkness! Will it never be day?" "Soon, soon," said Martha, overcoming her repugnance and trying to pacify her. "When the day comes you will laugh at these fears. I murdered her," screamed the miserable woman. "I killed her with fright. Why did she not give me the money? 'Twas no use to her. Ah! Look there!" Martha, with a horrible fear, followed her glance to the door, but saw nothing. "It's Ursula," said Tabitha from between her teeth. "Keep her off. Keep her off." The old woman, who by some unknown sense seemed to feel the presence of a third person in the room, moved a step forward and stood before her. As she did so Tabitha waved her arms as though to free herself from the touch of a detaining hand, half rose to her feet, and without a word fell dead before her. At this the old woman's courage forsook her, and with a great cry she rushed from the room, eager to escape from this house of death and mystery. The bolts of the great door were stiff with age, and strange voices seemed to ring in her ears as she strove wildly to unfasten them. Her brain whirled. She thought that the dead in their distant rooms called to her, and that a devil stood on the step outside laughing and holding the door against her. Then with a supreme effort she flung it open, and heedless of her night clothes passed into the bitter night. The path across the marshes was lost in the darkness, but she found it, the planks over the ditches slippery and narrow, but she crossed them in safety, until at last, her feet bleeding and her breath coming in great gasps, she entered the village and sank down more dead than alive on a cottage doorstep. The unknown. "Handsome is as handsome does," said the night watchman. It's an old saying, but it's true. Give a chap good looks, and it's precious little else that is given to him. He's lucky when his good looks are they gone, or partly gone, to get a berth as night watchman or some other hard and bad paid job. One drawback to a good-looking man is that he generally marries young, not because he wants to, but because somebody else wants him to. And that ain't the worst of it. The handsomest chap I ever knew married 5 times, and got 7 years for it. It wasn't his fault, poor chap, he simply couldn't say no. One of the best-looking men I ever knew was Cap'n Bill Smithers, what used to come up here once a week with a schooner called the Wild Rose. Funny thing about him was he didn't seem to know about his good looks, and he was one of the quietest, best-behaved men that ever came up the London River. Considering that he was mistook for me more than once, it was just as well. He didn't marry until East was close on 40, and then he made the mistake of marrying a widow-woman. She was like all the rest of them, only worse. Afore she was married butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, but as soon as she had got her lines safe she began to make up for it. For the first month or 2, he didn't mind it, he rather liked being fussed arter, but when he found that he couldn't go out for half an hour without having her with him he began to get tired of it. Her idea was that he was too handsome to be trusted out alone, and every trip he made he had to write up in a book, day by day, what he did with himself. Even then she wasn't satisfied, and, after saying that a wife's place was by the side of her husband, she took to sailing with him every vyge. What he could ha' seen in her I don't know. I asked him one evening, in a roundabout way, and he answered in such a long, roundabout way that I didn't know what to make of it till I see that she was standing just behind me, listening. After that I heard her asking questions about me, but I didn't marve to listen, I could hear her 20 yards away, and singing to myself at the same time. After that she treated me as if I was the dirt beneath her feet. She never spoke to me, but used to speak against me to other people. She was always talking to them about the sleeping sickness and things that kind. She said night watchmen always made you think of it somehow, but she didn't know why, and she couldn't tell you if you was to ask her. The only thing I was thankful for was that I wasn't her husband. She stuck to him like his shadow, and I began to think at last it was a pity she hadn't got something to be jealous about and something to occupy her mind with instead of me. She ought to have a lesson, I says to the skipper one evening. Are you going to be followed about like this all your life? If she was made to see the foolishness of earth ways she might get sick of it. My idea was to send her on a wild goose chase, and while the Wild Rose was away I thought it out. I wrote a love letter to the skipper signed with the name of Dorothy, and asked him to meet me at Cleopatra's Needle on the embankment at 8 o'clock on Wednesday. I told him to look out for a tall girl, Mrs. Smithers was as short as they make them, with mischievous brown eyes, in a blue hat with red roses on it. I read it over careful, and after marking it private, twice in front and once on the back, I stuck it down so that it could be blown open amost, and waited for the schooner to come back. Then I gave a van boy 2pence to and it to Mrs. Smithers, what was sitting on the deck alone, and tell that it was a letter for Captain Smithers. I was busy with a barge what happened to be handy at the time, but I heard her say that she would take it and give it to him. When I peeped round she had got the letter open and was leaning over the side to windward trying to get her breath. Every now and then she'd give another look at the letter and open her mouth and gasp, but by and by she got calmer, and, after putting it back in the envelope, she gave it a lick as though she was going to bite it, and stuck it down again. Then she went off the wharf, and I'm blessed if, 5 minutes afterwards, a young fellow didn't come down to the ship with the same letter and ask for the skipper. Who gave it you? Says the skipper, as soon as he could speak. A lady, says the young fellow. The skipper waved him away, and then he walked up and down the deck like a man in a dream. Bad news? I says, looking up and catching his eye. No, he says, no. Only a note about a couple of 2 casks of soda. He stuffed the letter in his pocket and sat on the side smoking till his wife came back in 5 minutes' time, smiling all over with good temper. "It's a nice evening," she says, "and I think I'll just run over to Dalston and see my cousin Joe." The skipper got up like a lamb and said he'd go and clean himself. "You needn't come if you feel tired," she says, smiling at him. The skipper could hardly believe his ears. "I do feel tired," he says. "I've had a heavy day, and I feel more like bed than anything else." "You turn in, then," she says. "I'll be all right by myself." She went down and tidied herself up, not that it made much difference to her, and, after patting him on the arm and giving me a stare that would hard made most men blink, she took herself off. I was pretty busy that evening. What with shifting lighters from under the jetty and sweeping up, it was pretty near 7:30 afore I had a minute I could call my own. I put down the broom at last, and was just thinking of stepping round to the Bull's Head for a half-pint when I see Captain Smithers come off the ship onto the wharf and walk to the gate. "I thought you was going to turn in," I says. "I did think of it," he says, "then I thought perhaps I'd better stroll as far as Broad Street and meet my wife." It was all I could do to keep a straight face. I'd a pretty good idea where she had gone, and it wasn't Dalston. "Come in and have a pint fust," I says. "No, I shall be late," he says, hurrying off. I went in and I had a glass by myself, and stood there so long thinking of Mrs. Smithers walking up and down by Cleopatra's Needle that at last the landlord first asked me what I was laughing at, and then offered to make me laugh the other side of my face. And then he wonders why people go to the Albion. I locked the gate rather earlier than usual that night. Sometimes if I'm up that end I leave it a bit late, but I didn't want Mrs. Smithers to come along and nip in without me seeing her face. It was 10 o'clock afore I heard the bell go, and when I opened the wicket and looked out I was surprised to see that she had got the skipper with her. And of all the miserable-looking objects I ever saw in my life he was the worst. She had him tight by the arm, and there was a look on her face that a'most scared me. "Did you go all the way to Dalston for her?" I says to him. Mrs. Smithers made a gasping sort o' noise, but the skipper didn't answer a word. She shoved him in front of her and stood ever him while he climbed aboard. When he held out his hand to help, she struck it away. I didn't get word with him till 5 o'clock next morning, when he came up on deck with his hair all rough and his eyes red for want of sleep. "Haven't I had a wink all night?" he says, stepping onto the wharf. I gave a little cough. "Didn't she have a pleasant time at Dalston?" I says. He walked a little further off from the ship. "She didn't go there," he says, in a whisper. "You've got something on your mind," I says. "What is it?" He wouldn't tell me at first, but at last he told me all about the letter from Dorothy, and his wife reading it unbeknown to him and going to meet her. "It was an awful meeting," he says. "Awful?" I couldn't think what to make of it. "Was the gal there, then?" I says, staring at him. "No," says the skipper, "but I was." "You?" I says, starting back. "You? What for?" "I'm surprised at you. I wouldn't ha' believed it of you." I felt a bit curious, he says, with a silly sort o' smile. "But what I can't understand is why the gal didn't turn up." "I'm ashamed of you, Bill," I says, very severe. "Perhaps she did," he says, after himself, and then saw my missus standing there waiting. "Perhaps that was it. Or perhaps it was somebody having a game with you," I says. "You're getting old, Bill," he says, very short. "You don't understand. It's some poor gal that's took a fancy to me, and it's my duty to meet her and tell her go things are." He walked off with his deed in the air, and if he took that letter out once and looked at it, he did 5 times. "Chuck it away," I says, going up to him. "Certainly not," he says, folding it up careful and stowing it away in his breast pocket. "She's took a fancy to me, and it's my duty." "You said that afore," I says. He stared at me nasty for a moment, and then he says, "You ain't seen any young lady hanging about a air, I suppose, Bill?" "A tall young lady with a blue hat trimmed with red roses." I shook my head. "If you should see her," he says. I'll tell your missus, I says. It'd be much easier for her to do her duty properly than it would you. She'd enjoy doing it, too. He went off again then, and I thought he had done with me, but he didn't. He spoke to me that evening as if I was the greatest friend he had in the world. I had 2 halfpints with him at the Albion, with his missus walking up and down outside, and after the second half-pint he said he wanted to meet Dorothy and tell her that he was married, and that he'd hoped she would meet some good man that was worthy of her. I had a week's peace while the ship was away, but she was hardly made fast afore I had it all over again and again. Are you sure there's been no more letters? He says. Sartain, I says. That's right, he says, that's right. And you haven't seen her walking up and down? No, I says. Have you been on the lookout? He says. I don't suppose a nice gal like that would come and shove her head in at the gate. Did you look up and down the road? Yes, I says. I fair made my eyes ache watching for her. I can't understand it, he says. It's a mystery to me, unless perhaps she's been taken ill. She must have seen me here in the first place, and she managed to get hold of my name. Mark my words, I shall hear from her again. Oh, do you know? I says. I feel it air, he says, very solemn, laying his hand on his chest. I didn't know what to do. What with his foolishness and his missus's temper, I see I had made a mess of it. He told me she had hardly spoke a word to him for 2 days, and when I said, being a married man myself, that it might have been worse, he said I didn't know what I was talking about. I did a bit of thinking arter he had gone aboard again. I dursn't tell him that I had wrote the letter, but I thought if he had 1 or 2 more he'd see that someone was arvaying a game with him, and that it might do him good. Besides which it was a little amusement for me. After everybody was in their beds asleep I sat on a clerk's stool in the office and wrote him another letter from Dorothy. I called him Dear Bill, and I said sorry I was that I hadn't had even a sight of him lately, having been laid up with a sprained ankle and he had only just got about again. I asked him to meet me at Cleopatra's Needle at 8 o'clock, and said that I should wear the blue hat with red roses. It was a very good letter, but I can see now that I done wrong in writing it. I was going to post it to him, but as I couldn't find an envelope without the name of the blessed wharf on it, I put it in my pocket till I got home. I got home at about 7:15, and slept like a child till pretty near 4. Then I went downstairs to have my dinner. The moment I opened the door I see there was something wrong. 3 times my missus licked her lips afore she could speak. Her face had gone a dirty white colour, and she was leaning forward with her hands on her hips, trembling all over with temper. Is my dinner ready? I says, easy like. 'Cause I'm ready for it. I wonder I don't tear you limb from limb, she says, catching her breath. What's the matter? I says. And then boil you, she says, between her teeth. You in one pot and your precious Dorothy in another. If anybody had offered me £5 to speak then, I couldn't hard done it. I see what I'd done in a flash, and I couldn't say a word, but I kept my presence mind, and as she came round one side of the table I went round the other. What have you got to say for yourself, she says, with a scream. Nothing, I says, at last. It's all a mistake. Mistake, she says. Yes, you made a mistake leaving it in your pocket, that's all the mistake you've made. That's what you do, is it, when you're supposed to be at the wharf? Go about with a blue hat with red roses in it. At your time o's life, and a wife at home working herself to death to make both ends meet and keep you respectable. It's all a mistake, I says. The letter wasn't for me. Oh, no, of course not, she says. That's why you'd got it in your pocket, I suppose. And I suppose you'll say your name ain't Bill next. Don't say things you'll be sorry for, I says. I'll take care o' that, she says. I might be sorry for not saying some things, but I don't think I shall. I don't think she was. I don't think she forgot anything, and she raked up things that I had contradicted years ago and what I thought was all forgot. And every now and then, when she stopped for breath, she'd try and get round to the same side of the table I was. She followed me to the street door when I went and called things up the road after me. I had a snack at a coffee shop for my dinner, but I hadn't got much appetite for it. I was too full of trouble and finding fault with myself, and I went off to my work with a heart as heavy as lead. I suppose I hadn't been on the wharf 10 minutes afore Captain Smithers came sidling up to me, but I got my spoken fust. "Look a 'ere," I says, "if you're going to talk about that forward hussy what's been writing to you, I ain't. I'm sick and tired of her." "Forward hussy," he says. "Forward hussy." And afore I could drop my broom he gave me a punch in the jaw that pretty near broke it. "Say another word against her," he says, "and I'll knock your ugly head off. How dare you insult a lady?" I thought I should have gone crazy at first, but I went off into the office without a word. Some men would ha' knocked him down for it, but I made allowances for his state o' mind, and I stayed inside until I see him get aboard again. He was sitting on deck when I went out, and his missus too, but neither of them spoke a word. I picked up my broom and went on sweeping, when suddenly I heard a voice at the gate I thought I knew, and in came my wife. "Ho," she says, calling out. "Ain't you gone to meet that gal at Cleopatra's Needle yet? You ain't going to keep her waiting, are you?" "HSH. I says. "HSH. "Yourself," she says, shouting. "I've done nothing to be ashamed of. I don't go to meet other people's husbands in a blue hat with red roses. I don't write them love letters and say HSH to my wife when she ventures to make a remark about it. I may work myself to skin and bone for a man what's old enough to know better, but I'm not going to be trod on. Dorothy, indeed. I'll Dorothy, sir, if I get the chance." Mrs. Smithers, what had been listening with all her ears, jumped up, and so did the skipper, and Mrs. Smithers came to the side in 2 steps. "Did you say Dorothy?" she says to my missus. "I did," says my wife. "She's been writing to my husband." "It must be the same one," says Mrs. Smithers. "She's been writing to mine too." The two of them stood there looking at each other for a minute, and then my wife, holding the letter between her finger and thumb as if it was peason, passed it to Mrs. Smithers. "It's the same," says Mrs. Smithers. "Was the envelope marked a private?" "I didn't see no envelope," says my missus. "This is all I found." Mrs. Smithers stepped onto the wharf and, taking hold of my missus by the arm, led her away whispering. At the same moment the skipper walked across the deck and whispered to me. "What do ye mean by it?" he says. "What do ye mean by harveying letters from Dorothy and not telling me about it?" "I can't help harveying letters any more than you can," I says. "Now perhaps you'll understand what I meant by calling her a forward hussy. Fancy her writing to you," he says, wrinkling his forehead. "PPH. She must be crazy. Perhaps it ain't a gal at all," I says. "My belief is somebody is harveying a game with us." "Don't be a fool," he says. "I'd like to see the party as would make a fool of me like that. Just see him and get my hands on him. He wouldn't want to play any more games. It was no good talking to him. He was half crazy with temper. If I'd said the letter was meant for him, he'd asked me what I meant by opening it and getting him into more trouble with his missus, instead of giving it to him on the quiet. I just stood and suffered in silence, and thought what a lot of medication did for people. "I want some money," says my missus, coming back at last with Mrs. Smithers. That was the way she always talked when she'd got me in her power. She took 2 and 10pence, all I'd got, and then she ordered me to go and get a cab. "Me and this lady are going to meet her," she says, sniffing at me. "And tell her what we think of her," says Mrs. Smithers, sniffing too. "And what we'll do to her," says my missus. I left them standing side by side, looking at the skipper as if he was a waxworks, while I went to find a cab. When I came back they was in the same position, and he was smoking with his eyes shut. They went off side by side in the cab, both of them sitting bolt upright, and only turning their heads at the last moment to give us looks we didn't want. "I don't wish her no harm," says the skipper, after thinking for a long time. "Was that the first letter you had from her, Bill?" "First and last," I says, grinding my teeth. I've been married longer than what you have, I says, and I tell you one thing. It won't make no difference to us whether they do or they don't, I says. And it didn't. The vigil. I'm the happiest man in the world, said Mr. Farrer, in accents of dreamy tenderness. Miss Ward sighed. Wait till father comes in, she said. Mr. Farrer peered through the plants which formed a welcome screen to the window and listened with some uneasiness. He was waiting for the firm, springy step that should herald the approach of ex-Sergeant Major Ward. A squeeze of Miss Ward's hand renewed his courage. Perhaps I had better light the lamp, said the girl, after a long pause. I wonder where mother's got to. She's on my side, at any rate, said Mr. Farrer. Poor mother, said the girl. She daren't call her soul her own. I expect she's sitting in her bedroom with the door shut. She hates unpleasantness. And there's sure to be some. So do I, said the young man, with a slight shiver. But why should there be any? He doesn't want you to keep single all your life, does he? He'd like me to marry a soldier, said Miss Ward. He says that the young men of the present day are too soft. The only thing he thinks about is courage and strength. She rose and, placing the lamp on the table, removed the chimney, and then sought round the room for the matches. Mr. Farrer, who had 2 boxes in his pocket, helped her. They found a box at last on the mantelpiece, and Mr. Farrer steadied her by placing one arm round her waist while she lit the lamp. A sudden exclamation from outside reminded them that the blind was not yet drawn, and they sprang apart in dismay as a grizzled and upright old warrior burst into the room and confronted them. Pull that blind down, he roared. Not you, he continued, as Mr. Farrer hastened to help. What do you mean by touching my blind? What do you mean by embracing my daughter? Eh? Why don't you answer? We are going to be married, said Mr. Farrer, trying to speak boldly. The sergeant major drew himself up, and the young man gazed in dismay at a chest which seemed as though it would never cease expanding. Married, exclaimed the sergeant major, with a grim laugh. Married to a little tame bunny rabbit. Not if I know it. Where's your mother? He demanded, turning to the girl. Upstairs, was the reply. Her father raised his voice, and a nervous reply came from above. A minute later Mrs. Ward, pale of cheek, entered the room. Here's fine goings-on, said the sergeant major, sharply. I go for a little walk, and when I come back this infernal cockroach has got its arm round my daughter's waist. Why don't you look after her? Do you know anything about it? His wife shook her head. 5'4" and about 30 round the chest, and wants to marry my daughter, said the sergeant major, with a sneer. Eh? What's that? What did you say? What? I said that's a pretty good size for a cockroach, murmured Mr. Farrer, defiantly. Besides, size isn't everything. If it was, you'd be a general instead of only a sergeant major. You get out of my house, said the other, as soon as he could get his breath. Go on. Sharp with it. I'm going, said the mortified Mr. Farrer. I'm sorry if I was rude. I came on purpose to see you tonight. Bertha, Miss Ward, told me your ideas, but I couldn't believe her. I said you'd got more common sense than to object to a man just because he wasn't a soldier. I want a man for a son-in-law, said the other. I don't say he's got to be a soldier. Just so, said Mr. Farrer. You're a man, ain't you? Well, I'll do anything that you'll do. PHH, said the sergeant major. I've done my little lot. I've been in action 4 times, and wounded in 3 places. That's my tally. The colonel said once that my husband doesn't know what fear is, said Mrs. Ward, timidly. He's afraid of nothing. Except ghosts, remarked her daughter, softly. Hold your tongue, miss, said her father, twisting his moustache. No sensible man is afraid of what doesn't exist. A lot of people believe they do, though, said Mr. Farrer, breaking in. I heard the other night that old Smith's ghost has been seen again swinging from the apple tree. 3 people have seen it. Rubbish, said the sergeant major. Maybe, said the young man, but I'll bet you, Mr. Ward, for all your courage, that you won't go up there alone at 12 o'clock one night to see." "I thought I ordered you out of my house just now," said the sergeant major, glaring at him. "Going into action," said Mr. Farrer, pausing at the door, "is one thing. You have to obey orders and you can't help yourself, but going to a lonely cottage 2 miles off to see the ghost of a man that hanged himself is another." "Do you mean to say I'm afraid?" blustered the other. Mr. Farrer shook his head. "I don't say anything," he remarked, "but even a cockroach does a bit of thinking sometimes." "Perhaps you'd like to go," said the sergeant major. "I don't mind," said the young man, "and perhaps you'll think a little better of me, Mr. Ward, if I do what you're afraid to do." Mrs. Ward and her daughter flung themselves hastily between the sergeant major and his intended sacrifice. Mr. Farrer, pale but determined, stood his ground. "I'll dare you to go up and spend a night there alone," he said. "I'll dare you," said the incensed warrior, weakly. "All right, I'll spend Wednesday night there," said Mr. Farrer, "and I'll come round on Thursday and let you know how I got on." "I dare say," said the other, "but I don't want you here, and, what's more, I won't have you. You can go to Smith's cottage on Wednesday at 12 o'clock if you like, and I'll go up any time between 12 and 3 and make sure you're there. Do I understand? I'll show you whether I'm afraid or not." "There's no reason for you to be afraid," said Mr. Farrer. "I shall be there to protect you." "That's very different to being there alone, as I shall be. But, of course, you can go up the next night by yourself, and wait for me, if you like. If you like to prove your courage, I mean." "When I want to be ordered about," said the sergeant major, in a magnificent voice, "I'll let you know. Now go, before I do anything I might be sorry for afterwards." He stood at the door, erect as a ramrod, and watched the young man up the road. His conversation at the supper table that night related almost entirely to puppy dogs and the best way of training them. He kept a close eye upon his daughter for the next day or two, but human nature has its limits. He tried to sleep one afternoon in his easy chair with one eye open, but the exquisite silence maintained by Miss Ward was too much for it. A hum of perfect content arose from the feature below, and 5 minutes later Miss Ward was speeding in search of Mr. Farrer. "I had to come, Ted," she said, breathlessly, "because tomorrow's Wednesday. I've got something to tell you, but I don't know whether I ought to." "Tell me and let me decide," said Mr. Farrer, tenderly. I'm so afraid you might be frightened," said the girl. "I won't tell you, but I'll give you a hint. If you see anything awful, don't be frightened." Mr. Farrer stroked her hand. "The only thing I'm afraid of is your father," he said, softly. "Oh," said the girl, clasping her hands together. "You have guessed it." "Guessed it," said Mr. Farrer. Miss Ward nodded. "I happened to pass his door this morning," she said, in a low voice. It was open a little way, and he was standing up and measuring one of Mother's nightgowns against his chest. I couldn't think what he was doing it for at first." Mr. Farrer whistled and his face hardened. "That's not fair play," he said at last. "All right, I'll be ready for him." "He doesn't like to be put in the wrong," said Miss Ward. "He wants to prove that you haven't got any courage. He'd be disappointed if he found you had." "All right," said Mr. Farrer again. "You're an angel for coming to tell me." "Father would call me something else, I expect," said Miss Ward, with a smile. "Goodbye. I want to get back before he wakes up." She was back in her chair, listening to her father's slumbers, half an hour before he awoke. "I'm making up for tomorrow night," he said, opening his eyes suddenly. His daughter nodded. "Shows strength of will," continued the sergeant major, amiably. "Wellington could go to sleep at any time by just willing it. I'm the same way, I can go to sleep at 5 minutes' notice." "It's a very useful gift," said Miss Ward, piously, "very." Mr. Ward had 2 naps the next day. He awoke from the second at 12:30 a.m., and in a somewhat disagreeable frame of mind rose and stretched himself. The house was very still. He took a small brown paper parcel from behind the sofa and, extinguishing the lamp, put on his cap and opened the front door. If the house was quiet, the little street seemed dead. He closed the door softly and stepped into the darkness. In terms which would have been understood by our army in Flanders, he execrated the forefathers, the name, and the upbringing of Mr. Edward Farrar. Not a soul in the streets, not a light in a window. He left the little town behind, passed the last isolated house on the road, and walked into the greater blackness of a road between tall hedges. He had put on canvas shoes with rubber soles, for the better surprise of Mr. Farrar, and his own progress seemed to partake of a ghostly nature. Every ghost story he had ever heard or read crowded into his memory. For the first time in his experience, even the idea of the company of Mr. Farrar seemed better than no company at all. The night was so dark that he nearly missed the turning that led to the cottage. For the first few yards he had almost to feel his way, then, with a greater yearning than ever for the society of Mr. Farrar, he straightened his back and marched swiftly and noiselessly towards the cottage. It was a small, tumble-down place, set well back in an overgrown garden. The sergeant major came to a halt just before reaching the gate, and, hidden by the hedge, unfastened his parcel and shook out his wife's best nightgown. He got it over his head with some difficulty, and, with his arms in the sleeves, tried in vain to get his big hands through the small, lace-trimmed wristbands. Despite his utmost efforts he could only get 2 or 3 fingers through, and after a vain search for his cap, which had fallen off in the struggle, he made his way to the gate and stood there waiting. It was at this moment that the thought occurred to him that Mr. Farrar might have failed to keep the appointment. His knees trembled slightly and he listened anxiously for any sound from the house. He rattled the gate and, standing with white arms outstretched, waited. Nothing happened. He shook it again, and then, pulling himself together, opened it and slipped into the garden. As he did so, a large bough which lay in the center of the footpath thoughtfully drew on one side to let him pass. Mr. Ward stopped suddenly and, with his gaze fixed on the bough, watched it glide over the grass until it was swallowed up in the darkness. His own ideas of frightening Mr. Farrar were forgotten, and in a dry, choking voice he called loudly upon the name of that gentleman. He called 2 or 3 times, with no response, and then, in a state of panic, backed slowly towards the gate with his eyes fixed on the house. A loud crash sounded from somewhere inside, the door was flung violently open, and a gruesome figure in white hopped out and squatted on the step. It was evident to Sergeant Major Ward that Mr. Farrar was not there, and that no useful purpose could be served by remaining. It was clear that the young man's courage had failed him, and, with grey head erect, elbows working like the sails of a windmill, and the ends of the nightgown streaming behind him, the Sergeant Major bent his steps towards home. He dropped into a walk after a time and looked carefully over his shoulder. So far as he could see he was alone, but the silence and loneliness were oppressive. He looked again, and, without stopping to inquire whether his eyes had deceived him, broke into a run again. Alternately walking and running, he got back to the town, and walked swiftly along the streets to his house. Police Constable Burgess, who was approaching from the other direction, reached it at almost the same moment, and, turning on his lantern, stood gaping with astonishment. "Anything wrong?" he demanded. "Wrong," panted the sergeant major, trying to put a little surprise and dignity into his voice. "No. I thought it was a lady walking in her sleep at first," said the constable. "A tall lady." The sergeant major suddenly became conscious of the nightgown. "I've been for a little walk," he said, still breathing hard. "I felt a bit chilly, so I put this on." "Suits you, too," said the constable, stiffly. "But you army men always was a bit dressy. Now if I put that on I should look ridiculous." The door opened before Mr. Ward could reply, and revealed, in the light of a bedroom candle, the astonished countenances of his wife and daughter. "George!" exclaimed Mrs. Ward. "Father!" said Miss Ward. The sergeant major tottered in and, gaining the front room, flung himself into his armchair. A stiff glass of whiskey and water, handed him by his daughter, was swallowed at a gulp. "Did you go?" inquired Mrs. Ward, clasping her hands. The sergeant major, fully conscious of the suspicions aroused by his disordered appearance, rallied his faculties. "Not likely," he said, with a short laugh. "After I got outside I knew it was no good going there to look for that young snippet. He'd no more think of going there than he would of flying. I walked a little way down the road, for exercise, and then strolled back." "But my nightgown," said the wondering Mrs. Ward. "Put it on to frighten the constable," said her husband. He stood up and allowed her to help him pull it off. His face was flushed and his hair tousled, but the bright fierceness of his eye was unquenched. In submissive silence she followed him to bed. He was up late next morning, and made but a poor breakfast. His after-dinner nap was disturbed, and tea was over before he had regained his wonted calm. An hour later the arrival of a dignified and reproachful Mr. Farrar set him blazing again. "I have come to see you about last night," said Mr. Farrar, before the other could speak. "A joke's a joke, but when you said you would come I naturally expected you would keep your word." "Keep my word," repeated the sergeant major, almost choking with wrath. "I stayed there in that lonely cottage from 12 to 3, as per agreement, waiting for you," said Mr. Farrar. "You were not there," shouted the sergeant major. "How do you know?" inquired the other. The sergeant major looked round helplessly at his wife and daughter. "Prove it," said Mr. Farrar, pushing his advantage. "You questioned my courage, and I stayed there 3 hours. Where were you?" "You were not there," said the sergeant major. "I know. You can't bluff me. You were afraid." "I was there, and I'll swear it," said Mr. Farrar. "Still, there's no harm done. I'll go there again tonight, and I'll dare you to come for me." "Dare," said the sergeant major, choking. "Dare." "Dare," repeated the other, "and if you don't come this time I'll spread it all over Markham. Tomorrow night you can go there and wait for me. If you see what I saw." "Oh, Ted," said Miss Ward, with a shiver. "Saw," said the sergeant major, starting. "Nothing harmful," said Mr. Farrar, calmly. "As a matter of fact, it was very interesting." "What was?" demanded the sergeant major. "It sounds rather silly, as a matter of fact," said Mr. Farrar, slowly. "Still, I did see a broken bough moving about the garden." Mr. Ward regarded him open-mouthed. "Anything else?" he inquired, in a husky voice. "A figure in white," said Mr. Farrar, with long waving arms, hopping about like a frog. "I don't suppose you believe me, but if you come tonight perhaps you'll see it yourself. It's very interesting." "Where, weren't you frightened?" inquired the staring Mrs. Ward. Mr. Farrar shook his head. "It would take more than that to frighten me," he said, simply. "I should be ashamed of myself to be afraid of a poor thing like that. It couldn't do me any harm." "Did you see its face?" inquired Mrs. Ward, nervously. Mr. Farrar shook his head. "What sort of a body had it got?" said her daughter. "So far as I could see, very good," said Mr. Farrar. "Very good figure, not tall, but well made." An incredible suspicion that had been forming in the sergeant major's mind began to take shape. "Did you see anything else?" he asked, sharply. "One more," said Mr. Farrar, regarding him pleasantly. "One I call the running ghost." "Run," began the sergeant major, and stopped suddenly. "It came in at the front gate," pursued Mr. Farrar. "A tall, well-knit figure of martial bearing, much about your height, Mr. Ward, with a beautiful filmy white robe down to its knees." He broke off in mild surprise, and stood gazing at Miss Ward, who, with her handkerchief to her mouth, was rocking helplessly in her chair. "Knees," he repeated, quietly. It came slowly down the path, and halfway to the house it stopped, and in a frightened sort of voice called out my name. I was surprised, naturally, but before I could get to it, to reassure it. "That'll do," said the sergeant major, rising hastily and drawing himself up to his full height. "You asked me," said Mr. Farrar, in an aggrieved voice. "I know I did," said the sergeant major, breathing heavily. "I know I did, but if I sit here listening to any more of your lies I shall be ill. The best thing you can do is to take that giggling girl out and give her a breath of fresh air. I have done with her. Easy money." A lad of about 20 stepped ashore from the schooner Jane, and joining a girl, who had been avoiding for some 10 minutes the ardent gaze of the night watchman, set off arm in arm. The watchman rolled his eyes and shook his head slowly. "Nearly all his money on his back," he said, "and what little bit he's got over he'll spend on her. And 3 months after they're married he'll wonder what he ever saw in her. If a man marries he wishes he'd a dient, and if he doesn't marry he wishes he'd had. That's life." Looking at them two young fools reminds me of a nevy of Sam Smalls, a man I think I've spoke to you of afore. As a rule Sam didn't talk much about his relations, but there was a sister of his in the country what he was rather fond of because he hadn't seen her for 20 years. She had got a boy what he had just got a job in London, and when he wrote and told her he was keeping company with the handsomest and loveliest and best art gal in the whole wide world, she wrote to Sam about it and asked him to give his nevy some good advice. Sam had just got back from China and was living with Peter Russet and Ginger Dick as usual, and after reading the letter about 7 times and asking Ginger how he spelt minx, he read the letter out loud to them and asked them what they thought about it. Ginger shook his head, and, after thinking a bit, Peter shook his too. "She's caught him rather young," says Ginger. "They get it bad at that age too," says Peter. "When I was 20, there was a gal as I was fond of, and a regiment couldn't hard parted us." "What did part you then?" says Sam. "Another gal," says Peter, "a gal I took a fancy to, that's what did it." "I was nearly married when I was 20, says Ginger, with a faraway look in his eyes. "She was the most beautiful gal I ever saw in my life. She had £100 a year of her own and she couldn't bear me out of her sight. If a thump across the chest would do that cough of yours any good, Sam." "Don't take no notice of him, Ginger," says Peter. "Why didn't you marry her?" "'Cause I was afraid she might think I was arter her money," says Ginger, getting a little bit closer to Sam. Peter had another turn then, and him and Ginger kept on talking about gals whose arts they had broke till Sam didn't know what to do with himself. "I'll just step round and see my nevy, while you and Peter are amusing each other," he says at last. "I'll ask him to come round tomorrow and then you can give him good advice." The nevy came round next evening. Bright, cheerful young chap he was, and he agreed with everything they said. When Peter said as all gals was deceivers, he said he'd known it for years, but they was born that way and couldn't help it, and when Ginger said that no man ought to marry afore he was 50, he corrected them and made it 55. "I'm glad to hear you talk like that," says Ginger. "So am I," says Peter. "He's got his head screwed on right," says Sam, what thought his sister had made a mistake. "I'm surprised when I look round at the women men are they married," says the nevy, "what they could are they seen in them I can't think. Me and my young lady often laugh about it." "You're what?" says Sam, pretending to be very surprised. "My young lady," says the nevy. Sam gives a cough. "I didn't know you'd got a young lady," he says. "Well, are they," says his nevy, "and we're going to be married at Christmas." But you ain't 55, says Ginger. "I'm 21, says the nevy, "but my case is different. There isn't another young lady like mine in the world. She's different to all the others, and it ain't likely I'm going to let her be snapped up by somebody else." 55. "Why, I'm to wait till Christmas I don't know. She's the prettiest and handsomest gal in the world, and she's the cleverest one I ever met. You ought to hear her laugh. Like music it is. You'd never forget it. 21 is young," says Ginger, shaking his head. "Have you known her long?" 3 months, says the nevy. "She lives in the same street as I do." "Oh, it is she ain't been snapped up before, I can't think, but she told me that she didn't care for men till she saw me." "They all say that," says Ginger. "If I've had it said to me once, I've had it said 20 times, says Peter, nodding. "They do it to flatter," says old Sam, looking as if he knew all about it. "You wait till you are my age, Joe, then you'll know why I should have been married dozens over times if I lady ain't been careful." "Perhaps it was a bit on both sides," says Joe, looking at his uncle. "Perhaps they was careful too. If you only saw my young lady, you wouldn't talk like that. She's got the truthfulest eyes in the world. Large grey eyes like a child's, leastways sometimes they are grey and sometimes they are blue. It seems to depend on the light somehow. I've seen them when they was a brownish gold. And she smiles with the eyes. Hasn't she got a mouth, says Ginger, what was getting a bit tired of it. You've been crossed in love, says the Navy, staring at him. That's what's the matter with you. And looking at you, I don't wonder at it. Ginger half got up, but Sam gave him a look and he sat down again, and then they all sat quiet while the Navy went on telling them about his gal. "I should like to see her," says his uncle at last. "Call round for me at 7 tomorrow night," says the young UN, "and I'll introduce you." "We might look in on our way," says Sam. Arter Ginger and Peter had both made eyes at him. "We're going out to spend the evening." "The more the merrier," says his Navy. "Well, so long, I expect she's waiting for me." He got up and said goodbye, and after he had gone, Sam and the other two shook their leads together and said what a pity it was to be 21. Ginger said it made him sad to think of it, and Peter said any gal could look at a man under 30, he couldn't think. They all went round to the Nevis the next evening. They was a little bit early owing to Ginger's watch having been set right by guesswork, and they had to sit in a row on the Nevis bed waiting while he cleaned himself and changed his clothes. Although it was only Wednesday, he changed his collar, and he was so long making up his mind about his necktie that his uncle tried to make it up for him. By the time he had finished, Sam said it made him think it was Sunday. Miss Gill was at home when they got there, and all three of them was very much surprised that such a good-looking gal should take up with Sam's Navy. Ginger nearly said so, but Peter gave him a dig in the back just in time, and he called him something under his breath instead. "Why shouldn't we all make an evening of it?" says Ginger, after they had been talking for about 10 minutes, and the Nevies had looked at the clock 3 or 4 times. "Because two's company," says Mrs. Gill. "Why, you was young yourself once. Can't you remember?" "He's young now, mother," says the gal, giving Ginger a nice smile. "I tell you what we might do," says Mrs. Gill, putting her finger to her forehead and considering. "You and Joe go out and have your evening, and me and these gentlemen'll go off together somewhere. I shall enjoy an outing, I ain't had one for a long time." Ginger said it would be very nice if she thought it wouldn't make her too tired, and afore Sam or Peter could think of anything to say, she was upstairs putting the bonnet on. They thought plenty to say while they was sitting alone with Ginger waiting for her. "My idea was for the gal and your Navy to come too," says poor Ginger. "Then I thought we might lose them and I would have a little chat with the gal, and show her foolish she was." "Well, you've done it now," says Sam. "Spoilt our evening." "Perhaps good will come out of it," says Ginger. "If the old lady takes a fancy to us we shall be able to come again, and then to please you, Sam, I'll have a go to cut your Navy out." Sam stared at him, and Peter stared too, and then they looked at each other and began to laugh till Ginger forgot where he was and offered to put Sam through the window. They were still quarreling under their breath and saying what they'd like to do to each other when Mrs. Gill came downstairs. Dressed up to the nine she was, and they walked down the street with a feeling that everybody was looking at them. One thing that helped to spoil the evening was that Mrs. Gill wouldn't go into public houses, but to make up for it she went into sweet stuff shops 3 times and had ices while they stood and watched and wondered she could do it. And after that she stopped at a place Poplar Way, where there was a few swings and roundabouts and things. She was as skittish as a school gal, and after taking poor Sam on the roundabout till he didn't know whether he was on his heels or his deed, she got him into a boat swing and swung him till he felt like a boy on his fast vyge. After that she took him to the rifle gallery, and afore he had 3 shots the man took the gun away from him and threatened to send for the police. It was an expensive evening for all of them, but as Ginger said when they got home they had broken the ice, and he bet Peter Russet $50 that afore 2 days had passed he'd take the Nevis gal for a walk. He stepped round by himself the next afternoon and made himself agreeable to Mrs. Gill, and the day after they was both so nice and kind that he plucked up his courage and offered to take Miss Gill to the zoo. She said no at first, of course, but after Ginger had pointed out that Joe was at work all day and couldn't take care of himself, and that he was Joe's uncle's best pal, she began to think better of it. "Why not?" says her mother. "Joe wouldn't mind. He wouldn't be so silly as to be jealous Mr. Ginger Dick." "Of course not," says the gal. "There's nothing to be jealous of." She let her mother and Ginger persuade her after a time, and then she went upstairs to clean herself, and put on a little silver brooch that Ginger said he had picked up coming along. She took about 3/4 of an hour to get ready, but when she came down, Ginger felt that it was quite worth it. He couldn't take his eyes off her, as the saying goes, and he sat by her side on the top of the omnibus like a man in a dream. "This is better than being at sea," he says at last. "Don't you like the sea?" says the gal. "I should like to go to sea myself." "I shouldn't mind the sea if you was there," says Ginger. Miss Gill turned her head away. "You mustn't talk to me like that," she says in a soft voice. "Still." "Still what?" says Ginger, arter waiting a long time. "I mean, if I did go to sea, it would be nice to have a friend on board," she says. "I suppose you ain't afraid of storms, are you?" "I like 'em," says Ginger. "You look as if you would," says the gal, giving him a little look under her eyelashes. "It must be nice to be a man and be brave. I wish I was a man." "I don't," says Ginger. "Why not?" says the gal, turning her head away again. Ginger didn't answer, he gave her elbow a little squeeze instead. She took it away at once, and Ginger was just wishing he'd ain't been so foolish, when it came back again, and they sat for a long time without speaking a word. "The sea is all right for some things," says Ginger at last, "but suppose a man married?" The gal shook her head. "It would be hard on his wife," she says, with another little look at him, but. Ginger pinched her elbow again. "But perhaps he could get a job ashore," she says, "and then he could take his wife out for a bus ride every day." They had to change buses after a time, and they got on a wrong bus and went miles out o' their way, but neither of them seemed to mind. Ginger said he was thinking of something else, and the gal said she was too. They got to the zoological gardens at last, and Ginger said he had never enjoyed himself so much. When the lions roared she squeezed his arm, and when they had an elephant ride she was holding on to him with both hands. "I am enjoying myself," she says, as Ginger helped her down and said woe to the elephant. "I know it's wicked, but I can't help it, and what's more, I'm afraid I don't want to help it." She let Ginger take her balm when she nearly tripped up over a peppermint ball some kid had dropped, and, after a little persuasion, she had a bottle of lemonade and 6 bath buns at a refreshment stall for dinner. She was as nice as she could be to him, but by the time they started for home, she had turned so quiet that Ginger began to think he must have offended there in some way. "Are you tired?" he says. "No," says the gal, shaking her head, "I've enjoyed myself very much." "I thought you seemed a bit tired," says Ginger, after waiting a long time. "I'm not tired," says the gal, giving him a sad sort o' little smile, "but I'm a little bit worried, that's all." "Worried?" says Ginger, very tender. "What's worrying you?" "Oh, I can't tell you," says Miss Gill. "It doesn't matter, I'll try and cheer up. What a lovely day it is, isn't it? I shall remember it all my life." "What is it worrying you?" says Ginger, in a determined voice. "Can't you tell me?" "No," says the gal, shaking her head, "I can't tell you because you might want to help me, and I couldn't allow that." "Why shouldn't I help you?" says Ginger. "It's what we was put here for, to help one another." "I couldn't tell you," says the gal, just dabbing at her eyes with a lace pocket handkerchief about 1.5 times the size of their nose. "Not if I ask you to," says Ginger. Miss Gill shook her head, and then she tried her hardest to turn the conversation. She talked about the weather, and the monkey house, and a gal in a street whose hair changed from red to black in a single night, but it was all no good. Ginger wouldn't be put off, and at last she says, "Well," she says, "if you must know, I'm in a difficulty. I have got to get £3, and where to get it I don't know any more than the man in the moon. Now let's talk about something else." "Do you owe it?" says Ginger. "I can't tell you any more," says Miss Gill, "and I wouldn't have told you that only you asked me, and somehow I feel as though I have to tell you things, when you want me to." £3 ain't much," says poor Ginger, what had just been paid off after a long vyge. "I can let you have it and welcome." Miss Gill started away from Jim as though she had been stung, and it took him all his time to talk her round again. When he had, she begged his pardon and said he was the most generous man she had ever met, but it couldn't be. "I don't know when I could pay it back," she says, "but I thank you all the same for offering it." "Pay it back when you like," says Ginger, "and if you never pay it back, it don't matter." He offered her the money 4 or 5 times, but she wouldn't take it, but at last just as they got near her house he forced it in her hand, and put his own hands in his pockets when she tried to make him take it back. You are good to me, she says after they had gone inside and her mother had gone upstairs after giving Ginger a bottle o' her beer to amuse himself with. I shall never forget you. Never. I hope not, says Ginger, starting. Are you coming out again tomorrow? I'm afraid I can't, says Miss Gill, shaking her head and looking sorrowful. Not with me, says Ginger, sitting down beside her on the sofa and putting his arm so that she could lean against it if she wanted to. I don't think I can, says the gal, leaning back very gentle. Think again, says Ginger, squeezing her waist a little. Miss Gill shook her head, and then turned and looked at him. Her face was so close to his, that, thinking that she mad put it there a purpose, he kissed it, and the next moment he got a clout that made his head ring. Oh dare you, she says, jumping up with a scream. Oh dare you. Oh dare. What's the matter, says her mother, coming downstairs like a runaway barrel of treacle. He's insulted me, says Miss Gill, taking out her little handkerchief and sobbing. He kiss me. What, says Mrs. Gill. Well, I'd never have believed it. Never. Why, he ought to be taken up. What do ye mean by it, she says, turning on poor Ginger. Ginger tried to explain, but it was all no good, and 2 minutes afterwards he was walking back to his lodgings like a dog with its tail between its legs. His head was going round and round with astonishment, and he was in such a temper that he barged into a man twice as big as himself and then offered to knock his head off when he objected. And when Sam and Peter asked him how he had got on, he was in such a state of mind it was all he could do to answer them. And I'll trouble you for my $50, Peter, he says, I've been out with her all day, and I've won my bet. Peter paid it over like a lamb, and then he sat thinking horrid for a bit. Are you going out with her again tomorrow, Ginger, he says, after a time. I don't know, says Ginger, careless like, I ain't made up my mind yet. Peter looked at him and then he looked at Sam and winked. Let me have a try, he says, I'll bet you another $50 that I take her out. Perhaps I shall come home in a better temper than what you have. Old Sam said it wasn't right to play with a gal start in that way, but after a lot of talking and telling Sam to shut up, Ginger took the bet. He was quite certain in his own mind that Miss Gill would slam the door in Peter's face, and after he had started off next morning, Ginger and Sam waited in to have the pleasure of laughing in his face. They got tired of waiting at last, and went out to enjoy themselves, and breathe the fresh air in a pub down Poplar Way. They got back at 7 o'clock, and 10 minutes afterwards Peter came in and sat down on his bed and began to smoke without a word. Had a good time, says Ginger. Rippin', says Peter, holding his pipe tight between his teeth. You owe me your $50, Ginger. Where'd you go, says Ginger, passing it over. Crystal Palace, says Peter. Are you going to take her out tomorrow, says Sam. I don't think so, says Peter, taking his pipe out of his mouth and yawning. She's rather too young for me, I like talking to gals what's a bit older. I won't stand in Ginger's way. I found her a bit young too, says Ginger. Perhaps we'd better let Sam's neveu have her. After all it's a bit rough on him when you come to think of it. You're quite right, says Peter, jumping up. It's Sam's business, and why we should go out of our way and inconvenience ourselves to do him a good turn, I don't know. It's Sam all over, says Ginger, he's always been like that, and the more you try to oblige him, the more you may. They went on abusing Sam till he got sick and tired of it, and after telling them what he thought of them he slammed the door and went out and spent the evening by himself. He would hardly speak to them next day, but after tea he brightened up a bit and they went off together as if nothing had happened, and the first thing they saw as they turned out of their street was Sam's nevy coming along smiling till it made their faces ache to look at him. I was just coming to see you, he says. We're just off on business, says Ginger. I wasn't going to stop, says the nevy, my young lady just told me to step along and show uncle what she has bought me. A silver watch and chain and a gold ring. Look at it. He held his hand under Ginger's nose, and Ginger stood there looking at it and opening and shutting his mouth like a dying fish. Then he took Peter by the arm and led him away while the Navy was opening his new watch and showing Sam the works. "How much did she get out of you, Peter?" says Ginger, looking at him very hard. "I don't want any lies." "£3, says Peter, staring at him. "Same air," says Ginger, grinding his teeth. "Did she give you a smack on the side of your face?" "What are you talking about, Ginger?" says Peter. "Did she smack your face too?" says Ginger. "Yes," says Peter. "His other self." "They're as like as two peas, him and his brother," said the night watchman, gazing blandly at the indignant face of the lighterman on the barge below, "and the only way I know this one is Sam is because Bill don't use bad language. Twins they are, but the likeness is only outside. Bill's dart is as white as snow." He cut off a plug of tobacco, and, placing it in his cheek, waited expectantly. "White as snow," he repeated. "That's me," said the lighterman, as he pushed his unwieldy craft from the jetty. "I'll tell Sam your opinion of him. So long." The watchman went a shade redder than usual. "That's twins all over," he said, sourly, "always deceiving people. It's Bill arter all, and, instead of hurting his feelings, I've just been flattering of him up. It ain't the first time I've had trouble over a likeness. I've been a twin myself in a manner o' speaking. It didn't last long, but it lasted long enough for me to always be sorry for twins, and to make a lot of allowance for them. It must be very horrid to have another man going about with your face on his shoulders, and getting it into trouble. It was a year or two ago now. I was sitting one evening at the gate, smoking a pipe and looking at a newspaper I had found in the office, when I see a gentleman coming along from the swing bridge. Well-dressed, clean-shaved chap he was, smoking a cigarette. He was walking slow and looking about him casual-like, until his eyes fell on me, when he gave a perfect jump of surprise, and, arter looking at me very odd, walked on a little way and then turned back. He did it twice, and I was just going to say something to him, something that I had been getting ready for him, when he spoke to me. "Good evening," he says. "Good evening," I says, folding the paper over and looking at him rather severe. "I hope you'll excuse me staring," he says, very polite, "but I've never seen such a face and figure as yours in all my life, never." "Ah, you ought to have seen me a few years ago," I says. "I'm like everybody else, I'm getting on." "Rubbish," he says. "You couldn't be better if you tried." "It's marvelous." "Wonderful." "It's the very thing I've been looking for." "Why, if you'd been made to order you couldn't have been better." I thought at first he was by way of trying to get a drink out o' me. I've been played that game afore, but instead o' that he asked me whether I'd do him the pleasure of harveying one with him. We went over to the Albion, and I believe I could have had it in a pail if I'd only liked to say the word. And all the time I was drinking he was looking me up and down, till I didn't know where to look, as the saying is. "I came down here to look for somebody like you," he says, "but I never dreamt I should have such luck as this. I'm an actor, and I've got to play the part of a sailor, and I've been worried some time to make up for the part. I understand." "No," I says, looking at him. "I want to look the real thing," he says, speaking low so the landlord shouldn't hear. "I want to make myself the living image of you. If that don't fetch I'll give up the stage and grow cabbages." "Make yourself like me," I says. "Why, you're no more like me than I'm like a seasick monkey." "Not so much," he says. "That's where the art comes in." He stood me another drink, and then, taking my arm in a cuddling sort of way, and calling me dear boy, he led me back to the wharf and explained. He said he would come round next evening with what he called his make-up box, and paint his face and make it himself up till people wouldn't know one from the other. "And what about your figure?" I says, looking at him. "A cushion," he says, winking, "or maybe a couple." "And what about clothes?" "You'll darve to sell me those you've got on. Hat and all. And boots." I put a price on Jem that I thought would have finished him then and there, but it didn't. And at last, after paying me so many more compliments that they began to get into my head, he fixed up a meeting for the next night and went off. "And mind," he says, coming back, "not a word to a living soul." He went off again, and, after going to the Bull's Head and arveying a pint to clear my id, I went and sat down in the office and thought it over. It seemed all right to me as far as I could see, but perhaps the pint didn't clear my id enough, perhaps I ought to add 2 pints. I lay awake best part of next day thinking it over, and when I got up I had made up my mind. I put my clothes in a sack, and then I put on some others as much like them as possible, only perhaps a bit older, in case the missus should get asking questions, and then I sat wondering to get out with the sack without her noticing it. She's got a very inquiring mind, and I wasn't going to tell her any lies about it. Besides which I couldn't think of one. I got out at last by playing a game on her. I pretended to drop $50 in the washoes, and while she was busy on her hands and knees I went off as comfortable as you please. I got into the office with it all right, and, just as it was getting dark, a cab drove up to the wharf and the actor chap jumped out with a big leather bag. I took him into the private office, and he was so ready with his money for the clothes that I offered to throw the sack in. He changed into my clothes first of all, and then, asking me to sit down in front of him, he took a looking-glass and a box out of his bag and began to alter his face. What with sticks of coloured paint, and false eyebrows, and a beard stuck on with gum and trimmed with a pair of scissors, it was more like a conjuring trick than anything else. Then he took a wig out of his bag and pressed it on his head, put on the cap, put some black stuff on his teeth, and there he was. We both looked into the glass together while he gave the finishing touches, and then he clapped me on the back and said I was the handsomest sailorman in England. I shall have to make up a bit beevier when I'm behind the floats, he says, but this is enough for dare. What do you think of the imitation of your voice? I think I've got it exact. If you ask me, I says, it sounds like a poll parrot with a cold in the head. And now for your walk, he says, looking as pleased as if I'd said something else. Come to the door and see me go up the wharf. I didn't like to hurt his feelings, but I thought I should hard bust. He walked up that wharf like a dancing bear in a pair of trousers too tight for it, but he was so pleased with himself that I didn't like to tell him so. He went up and down 2 or 3 times, and I never saw anything so ridiculous in my life. That's all very well for us, he says, but what about other people? That's what I want to know. I'll go and arve a drink, and see whether anybody spots me. Afore I could stop him he started off to the Bull's Head and went in, while I stood outside and watched him. "Half a pint for ale," he says, smacking down a penny. I see the landlord draw the beer and give it to him, but he didn't seem to take no notice of him. Then, just to open his eyes a bit, I walked in and put down a penny and asked for a half pint. The landlord was just wiping down the counter at the time, and when I gave my order he looked up and stood staring at me with the wet cloth that he held up in the air. He didn't say a word, not a single word. He stood there for a moment smiling at us foolish-like, and then he let go o' the beer engine, what he was holding in his left hand, and sat down heavy on the bar floor. We both put our heads over the counter to see what had happened to him, and he started making the most horrible noise I ever heard in my life. I wonder it didn't bring the fire engines. The actor chap bolted out as if he'd been shot, and I was just thinking of following him when the landlord's wife and his 2 daughters came rushing out and asking me what I had done to him. There was 2 of them, says the landlord, trembling and holding on to his wife's arm, as they helped him up and got him in the chair. 2 of them. 2 of what, says his wife. 2 watchmen, says the landlord, both exactly alike and both asking for half a pint for ale. Yes, says his wife. You come and lay down, pa, says the gals. I tell you there was, says the landlord, getting his colour back, with temper. Yes, I know all about it, says his wife. You come inside for a bit, and, Gertie, you bring your father in a soda, a large soda. They got him in arter a lot of trouble, but 3 times he came back as far as the door, holding on to them, and taking a little peep at me. The last time he shook his head at me, and said if I did it again I could go and get my half pint somewhere else. I finished the beer what the actor had left, and, after telling the landlord I hoped his eyesight you'd be better in the morning, I went outside, and after a careful look round walked back to the wharf. I pushed the wicket open a little way and peeped in. The actor was standing just by the fuss crane talking to two of the hands off of the salt ram. He'd got his back to the light, but it was they didn't twig his voice, I can't think. They was so busy talking that I crept along by the side of the wall and got to the office without their seeing me. I went into the private office and turned out the gas there and sat down to wait for them. Then I heard a noise outside that took me to the door again and kept me there, holding onto the doorpost and gasping for my breath. The cook of the salt ram was sitting on a paraffin cast playing the mouth organ, and the actor, with his arms folded across his stomach, was dancing a hornpipe as if he'd gone mad. I never saw anything so ridiculous in my life, and when I recollected that they thought it was me, I thought I should hard dropped. A night watchman can't be too careful, and I knew that you'd be all over warping next morning that I had been dancing to a 2.5-penny mouth organ played by a ship's cook. A man that does his duty always has a lot of people ready to believe the worst of him. I went back into the dark office and waited, and by I heard them coming along to the gate and patting him on the back and saying he ought to be in a pantomime instead o' wasting his time night watching. He left at the gate, and then he came into the office smiling as if he'd done something clever. "What do ye think of me for a understudy?" he says, laughing. "They all thought it was you." There wasn't one of em had the slightest suspicion, not one. "And what about my character?" I says, folding my arms across my chest and looking at him. "Character," he says, staring. "Why, there's no harm in dancing, it's a innocent enjoyment." "It ain't one owes my innocent enjoyments," I says, "and I don't want to get the credit of it. If they hadn't been sitting in a pub all the evening they'd have spotted you at once." "Oh," he says, very huffy. "How?" "Your voice," I says. "You try and mimic a poll parrot, and think it's like me. And, for another thing, you walk about as though you're stuffed with sawdust." "I beg your pardon," he says, "the voice and the walk are exact." "Exact? What?" I says, looking him up and down. "You stand there and have the impudence to tell me that my voice is like that." "I do," he says. "Then I'm sorry for you," I says. "I thought you'd got more sense." He stood looking at me and gnawing his finger, and by he says, "Are you married?" he says. "I am," I says, very short. "Where do you live?" he says. I told him. "Very good," he says, "perhaps I'll be able to convince you after all. By the way, what do you call your wife?" "Mrs.? "Yes," I says, staring at him. "But what's it got to do with you?" "Nothing," he says. "Nothing. Only I'm going to try the poll parrot voice and the sawdust walk on her, that's all. If I can deceive you, that'll settle it." "Deceive her?" I says. "Do you think I'm going to let you go round to my house and get me into trouble with the missus like that? Why, you must be crazy, that dancing must have got into your deed." "Where's that arm?" he says, very sulky. "Arm?" I says. "I won't have it, that's all, and if you knew my missus you'd know without any telling. I'll bet you £1 to a sixpence she wouldn't know me," he says, very earnest. "She won't have the chance," I says, "so that's all about it." He stood there arguing for about 10 minutes, but I was as firm as a rock. I wouldn't move an inch, and at last, after we was both on the point of losing our tempers, he picked up his bag and said as though he must be getting off home, "But ain't you going to take those things off fast?" I says. "No," he says, smiling. "I'll wait till I get home. Ta-ta." He puts his bag on his shoulder and walked to the gate, with me following of him. "I expect I shall see a cab soon," he says. "Goodbye." "What are you laughing at?" I says. "Onny thoughts," he says. "Have you got far to go?" I says. "No, just about the same distance as you have," he says, and he went off spluttering like a soda water bottle. I took the broom and I had a good sweep up after he had gone, and I was just in the middle of it when the cook and the other 2 chaps from the Salt Ram came back, with 3 other sailormen and a brewer's drayman they had brought to see me dance. "Same as you did a little while ago, Bill," says the cook, taking out his beastly mouth organ and wiping it on his sleeve. "What tune would you like?" I couldn't get away from him, and when I told them I had never danced in my life, the cook asked me where I expected to go to. He told the drayman that I'd been dancing like a fairy in sea boots, and they all got in front of me and wouldn't let me pass. I lost my temper at last, and, after they had taken the broom away from me and the drayman and won over the sailorman had said what they'd do to me if I was only 50 years younger, they sheared off. I locked the gate arter and went back to the office, and I hadn't been there above half an hour when somebody started ringing the gate bell as if they was mad. I thought it was the cook's lock come back at fust, so I opened the wicket just a trifle and peeked out. There was a hansom cab standing outside, and I had hardly got my nose to the crack when the actor chap, still in my clothes, pushed the door open and nipped in. "You've lost," he says, pushing the door to and smiling all over. "Where's your sixpence?" "Lost?" I says, hardly able to speak. "D'ye mean to tell me you've been to my wife arter all I said to you?" "I do," he says, nodding, and smiling again. They were both deceived as easy. "Both?" I says, staring at him. "Both what? How many wives do ye think I've got? What do ye mean by it?" "Arter I left you," he says, giving me a little poke in the ribs, "I picked up a cab and, fast leaving my bag at Aldgate, I drove on to your house and knocked at the door. I knocked twice, and then an angry-looking woman opened it and asked me what I wanted. 'It's all right, missus,' I says. 'I've got half an hour off, and I've come to take you out for a walk.' 'What?' she says, drawing back with a start. 'Just a little turn round to see the shops,' I says, 'and if there's anything particular you'd like and it don't cost too much, you shall have it.' I thought at first, from the way she took it, she wasn't used to you giving her things. 'Oh dare you,' she says. 'I'll have you locked up. Oh dare you insult a respectable married woman. You wait till my husband comes home.' 'But I am your husband,' I says. 'Don't you know me, my pretty? Don't you know your pet sailor boy?' She gave a screech like a steam engine, and then she went next door and began knocking away like mad. Then I see that I had gone to number 12 instead of number 14. Your wife, your real wife, came out of number 14, and she was worse than the other. But they both thought it was you, there's no doubt of that. They chased me all the way up the road, and if it hadn't hard been for this cab that was just passing, I don't know what would have appealed to me." He shook his head and smiled again, and, after opening the wicket a trifle and telling the cabman he shouldn't be long, he turned to me and asked me for the sixpence to wear on his watch chain. "Sixpence?" I says. "Sixpence? What do you think is going to happen to me when I goes home?" "Oh, I hadn't thought that," he says. "Yes, course. What about my wife's jealousy?" I says. "What about the other, and her husband, a cooper as big as a house?" Well, he says, "one can't think of everything. It'll be all the same 100 years hence." "Look here," I says, taking his shoulder in a grip of iron. "You come back with me now in that cab and explain." "D'ye see? That's what you've got to do." "All right," he says, "certainly." Is the husband bad-tempered?" "You'll see," I says, "but that's your business. Come along." "With pleasure," he says, helping me in. "Half a mile while I tell the cabby where to drive to." He went to the back o' the cab, and afore I knew what had happened the horse had got a flick over the head with the whip and was going along at a gallop. I kept putting the little flap up and telling the cabby to stop, but he didn't take the slightest notice. After I'd done it 3 times he kept it down so as I couldn't open it. There was a crowd round my door when the cab drove up, and in the middle of it was my missus, the woman next door, and her husband, what he had just come home. Half a dozen of them helped me out, and afore I could say a word the cabman drove off and left me there. I dream of it now sometimes, standing there explaining and explaining, until, just as I feel I can't bear it any longer, 2 policemen come up and help me indoors. If they had helped my missus outside it would be a easier dream to have.